Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Vanishing Memories, the Erasure of Reality. It started with the photos. At first, I thought maybe I had accidentally deleted them. I searched the trash folder, poked through the cloud backup, and still, nothing came up. When I showed Daniel, he shrugged and said, "Maybe you never took those pictures." His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he were dismissing a silly misunderstanding. But it wasn't silly to me. I was positive those photos existed, had even shared some with him. That's when the first real argument started. Why would I imagine a whole weekend of pictures? I asked, heart pounding. I've seen them before. Daniel looked at me like I was losing grip on reality. Maybe you're mixing things up. You've been stressed lately. You forget stuff. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the nagging sensation in my gut told me something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I began testing the boundaries of our shared life. I checked the messages on my phone, texts from him that I was sure had been there. One conversation in particular stood out, the one where we planned a dinner with friends. It had been lively and full of jokes. But when I searched for it again, the thread was gone. Not archived or hidden, just gone. Did you delete that? I asked Daniel one evening as we sat at the kitchen table. He shook his head. No. Why would I? I pushed harder. Because it's missing. I swear I saw it last week. Daniel's jaw tightened. Maybe you're imagining things. That phrase felt like a slap. Every time I confronted him, every time I insisted that certain memories existed, he dismissed me, painting my mind as unreliable. But it wasn't just the photos or the messages. Objects around the apartment changed too. I had a small wooden box that held letters we had exchanged back when we first met. One night, while looking for a pen, I opened the box, and the letters weren't there. I emptied it, nothing. I confronted Daniel again. Did you move those? I asked, holding the empty box. He looked genuinely confused. No. I haven't touched that. I stared at him, feeling a strange mix of frustration and fear. The only logical conclusion was that someone was tampering with my reality. But who? And why? Daniel started to act differently too. Whenever I brought up any of these missing things, his eyes would harden, and he'd steer the conversation away, sometimes with an excuse, sometimes with irritation. There was one night he snapped at me for asking if he was hiding something. That's ridiculous. Why would I do that to you? He said sharply. I didn't know what to say. I just wanted to believe him. But the pattern of erasure was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I decided to document everything that seemed off. I wrote down each missing photo, each vanished message, each absent letter. The list grew, and with it, my anxiety. I started questioning my own memory. Was I really the one losing it? But deep down, I knew the truth felt different. It felt deliberate. I looked at Daniel one evening, as we sat watching a show, and asked quietly, "Have you ever changed anything in our lives? Any of the things we had?" He glanced at me, then away. His silence was louder than any denial. "Please talk to me," I urged. He hesitated, and then, in a low voice, "I don't know what you want from me." That night, I lay awake, trying to piece together the fragments of my daily life. Each time I confronted Daniel, the world shifted just enough to make me question everything. I felt trapped inside a puzzle with missing pieces, and the most terrifying part was not knowing who was removing them or what the picture was supposed to be. The last thing I remembered before sleep took me was the soft click of the apartment door locking behind him as he left for work. Alone in the quiet, I reached for my phone, scrolling through the gallery again. The photos from our trip were still missing. And in that silence, I realized it wasn't just memories disappearing, it was me. My reality was slipping away, one erased piece at a time. I stared at the blank space where the photos used to be, a hollow ache spreading through me. It was as if the world was slowly peeling away from my grasp, layer by fragile layer. My fingers trembled as I locked the phone and set it down on the nightstand. The room felt colder, emptier, like a void waiting to swallow me whole. A sudden noise snapped me out of my thoughts, a faint scratching coming from the kitchen. My heart pounded fiercely as I forced myself to get up, each step heavy with dread. The hallway was draped in shadows, but the light beneath the kitchen door flickered oddly, as if something or someone was moving just out of sight. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to catch any distinct sound. Nothing but the faint, persistent scratching. Swallowing my fear, I turned the knob slowly and peered inside. The kitchen was empty. No sign of movement. No one to be seen. Yet, on the counter, a single photograph lay face down. Hesitating, I flipped it over. It was a picture of us at the beach, arms wrapped tight, smiles wide. But the image was smeared, as though smeared with trembling hands or tears. More unnerving was the back. It had a message scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Remember before you forget." A chill ran down my spine. Someone wanted me to remember. Or maybe to realize just how much I was losing, how much I had already lost. I stared at the blank space where the message thread should have been, my fingers hovering uncertainly over the screen. "Daniel," I said, swallowing hard, "did you delete this? The whole conversation?" He looked up from his laptop, eyes narrowing just slightly. "No," he said slowly, "why would I? You always delete stuff by accident." "Not this time," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't touch it." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the faintest hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe you're just imagining things." I clenched my jaw and closed the messaging app, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just forgetfulness anymore. It felt deliberate, targeted. Like someone was erasing pieces of my history, rewriting the story I thought I shared with Daniel. I tried to push the suspicion aside. Maybe I was overthinking. Stress could play tricks. But when I pulled out my laptop to check the shared photo albums, I remembered we used Google Photos to back up everything. I was met with the same dead end. The albums from that weekend were gone. Not just missing photos, the entire album was erased. I called Lisa that night. Her voice was cheerful, as usual, but I was anxious. "Hey, Lisa. Did you, by any chance, delete the photos from last weekend? The ones we all took?" "No, why?" "I still have all of them on my phone." "Why?" I explained the situation, careful not to sound frantic, but her voice immediately sharpened. "Are you okay?" "This sounds weird." We agreed to meet the next day. I needed to see if anyone else had noticed these strange disappearances, or if I was really losing it. The coffee shop was busy, the hum of conversation a comforting backdrop as Lisa and I sat across from each other. I pulled out my phone and showed her the empty photo folder. Lisa frowned. "That's definitely strange. I have the photos here. See?" She swiped through a vibrant stream of images from the weekend, laughing faces, the messy dinner table, the city park where we'd spent the afternoon. I felt relief wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. How could these photos be on Lisa's phone but not mine? And why would Daniel deny they ever existed on my device? Lisa's expression hardened a little. Do you think Daniel is messing with your phone? Like, trying to make you question yourself? I shook my head. I don't want to believe that. He's been distant, but this feels purposeful. She looked at me seriously. You should be careful. If someone is manipulating your reality, it's not just about pictures or messages. It's about control. Her words echoed in my mind later that night, when I sat alone in our apartment, scrolling through my phone again. I opened the text messages app and searched for the dinner plan once more. Still gone. Then, out of frustration, I typed dinner into the search bar, hoping to find any trace at all. Nothing. I moved to our shared calendar app, thinking maybe the event was still there. We'd used it to schedule appointments and social events, but the dinner plan was missing. I asked Daniel casually the next morning, "Did you delete the dinner event from the calendar?" He shrugged. "I don't remember putting it in there." "There were reminders," I said, heart pounding. "We talked about it several times." He shook his head, eyes avoiding mine. "Maybe you got mixed up with another week." I wanted to push harder, but something in his gaze stopped me. Not fear, exactly, but a coldness, like a wall being built between us. I left it alone after that, but the doubts gnawed at me. A few days later, I found the final piece missing from my fractured reality. I was sorting through the pile of letters and bills on the kitchen counter when I noticed one from the bank. I opened it cautiously. It was a statement, nothing unusual except for a transaction I didn't recognize. A withdrawal from our joint account for a hefty sum, made the same day the dinner was supposed to happen. I confronted Daniel that evening. "Did you withdraw money from our account last week? Like a big amount?" He looked startled for a moment, then smoothed his expression. "Yeah, I needed cash for some expenses." "I told you." "No, you didn't mention anything." He sighed and stood up. "Look, maybe you're just stressed out. I've been handling some things. You don't need to micromanage every detail." I stared at him, feeling the familiar frustration rise. "Daniel, things are disappearing, photos, messages, plans. I don't know what's going on, but I'm scared. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if someone is trying to erase parts of my life." He looked at me with a mix of pity and irritation. "You're imagining things again. You're stressed. Take a break." I bit back the urge to argue. Instead, I decided to trust my instincts. If Daniel wasn't going to help me find answers, I'd have to look elsewhere. The next morning, I visited the local electronics store. I wanted a professional opinion about my phone. Maybe there was a glitch or malware. The technician's face grew serious as he ran diagnostics. "Everything looks normal," he said. "No signs of hacking or software errors. If messages or photos are missing, it's either someone deleted them or there's user error." "User error?" I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. "I know I didn't delete anything." He shrugged. "Phones don't just lose data on their own." I left the store feeling more alone than ever. Back at the apartment, Daniel was waiting. He looked calm, almost too calm. I wondered if he'd been watching me. "Did you get your phone checked?" he asked. I nodded, and before I could say more, he added, "See? Nothing wrong with your phone. Maybe you should stop worrying so much." I wanted to scream, to shout that this wasn't about the phone. It was about my memories. But I swallowed it down, stepping back to think. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, scrolling again through old photos, searching for anything familiar. Every time I confronted Daniel about the missing pieces, the world around me shifted a little more. The photos gone. The messages gone. Even simple things like our dinner plans vanished. And with each loss, Daniel's denials grew firmer, colder. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if someone was deliberately erasing my reality. But I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't trust him anymore. The thought twisted in my chest like a knife. I was trapped inside a world that kept changing, and the person I loved most was the one holding the eraser. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, staring blankly at the blank space where the conversation with Daniel should have been. Daniel came into the room, holding a glass of water. "You okay?" he asked, voice even but cautious. I'm not sure," I said, looking up at him. "The message thread with you, the one where we planned dinner last week, it's not there anymore. I can't find it anywhere." He hesitated, then smiled softly. "Did you maybe delete it? Sometimes the app glitches. You know how phones can be." "But I didn't," I said, voice rising slightly. "And it's not just that. The photos from our trip gone. The messages gone. It feels like the stuff I remember is just being wiped out." Daniel's expression hardened just a little, his smile vanishing. "You need to stop obsessing over this, okay? It's messing with your head." I clenched my jaw. That was the usual response. I was stressed, tired, forgetful. I was imagining things. I wanted to believe him, but every day, the world shifted beneath my feet like sand. Something was wrong, and I was desperate to find out what. After a long silence, I said, "Have you been deleting this stuff?" He looked away, face unreadable. "Why would I do that? I want us to have a future. Why would I erase our memories?" That question lingered in the air, heavy and sharp. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that this was just a strange glitch in my memory or my phone. But the evidence kept piling up. Photos, messages, reminders, everything I held onto to tether me to reality was disappearing. And Daniel was the only other person who had access to these things. Later that evening, I tried a different approach. I pulled out my laptop, opened the shared cloud folder we kept for trips and important documents. I scrolled through the files, fingers trembling. The folder was nearly empty. I called Daniel into the room. "Look at this." "Where's everything?" He shrugged again, but this time there was a hint of something else, annoyance, maybe? "Maybe you never uploaded those files?" "You're lying." "No, I'm not." His voice was quiet, but intense. "You need to stop tearing us apart with this. It's not healthy." The accusation hit me like a punch. It wasn't the first time he'd used that line, and it never failed to hurt. I sat back, trying to steady my breath. Was I tearing us apart? Or was something else at work here? That night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every moment. I started to think about the pattern of disappearances. It always happened when I brought up something specific, a memory we shared, a photo, a message. Whenever I confronted him, the world shifted, and the evidence vanished. The next morning, I woke up determined to get some answers. I decided to go through our old emails, hoping to find traces of conversations, plans, anything that might have been saved outside of our phones and cloud. Scrolling through months' worth of correspondence, I found nothing unusual until I reached a thread from 3 months ago. It was a message from Daniel to me, about a weekend trip to the coast. I opened it eagerly. It was there. The plans we made, the jokes we shared, the excitement we felt. But then I found a second thread, from the same day, to a different address. Curious, I opened it. It was another message from Daniel, but this one was to someone named Mark, arranging a separate meeting, referring to me in a way that made my stomach twist. The words were casual, but dismissive. He spoke about needing space, about someone who was starting to get on his nerves. I felt the cold spread through my body. I closed the laptop and sat in stunned silence. Was Daniel living a double life? Was he trying to erase parts of me from his world? Later that day, I confronted him again. "Who's Mark?" I asked quietly, watching his reaction. Daniel looked taken aback, then quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Just a coworker." "But why are you making plans with him that involve pushing me away?" He shook his head. "You're reading too much into this." "I'm not. I found the emails. The ones where you talk about needing space from me." "What's going on?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "You're making this about me, but you're the one who's unstable. You don't trust me, and that's pushing me away." His words stung, but beneath the anger was something else. Fear? Guilt? I wasn't sure anymore. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to small details around the apartment. Photos on the walls, notes stuck to the fridge, even the little souvenirs from trips we'd taken. I noticed some had been moved, others missing altogether. One afternoon, I found a receipt in the trash, a hotel booking I didn't recognize, dated 2 weeks ago, paid in Daniel's name. I asked him about it, and he claimed it was a work trip. But the dates overlapped with the times I remembered him being home. That night, I stayed up watching him, waiting for clues. But he was careful, always polite, always just out of reach emotionally. The man I thought I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone I couldn't read. I started wondering if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was imagining things, twisting memories, seeing conspiracies where there were none. But then the photos disappeared again. Then the messages. Then the notes. Every time I pushed for answers, reality shifted around me, as if someone was erasing my existence piece by piece. I realized then that this wasn't about memory or technology. It was about control. Daniel was controlling the narrative, deciding which memories were real and which weren't, rewriting our history to suit his needs. And I was the one losing the story. I didn't know how far he was willing to go to keep me in this fog of doubt and confusion. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to find a way out before there was nothing left of me at all. I waited until Daniel left for work before I started tearing through the apartment again, my hands shaking as I flipped through the photo albums on the shelves, albums we had filled together, or so I thought. I stared at the empty frames like they were some twisted joke. I could almost hear Daniel's calm voice echoing in my head, "Maybe you're mixing things up." But no, I wasn't. I had held those photos, shown them to him. I had proof, memories that I could taste, touch, and see in my mind's eye. But the physical evidence was vanishing. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery app. A blank screen stared back. The photos were simply not there. Panic clawed at my throat as I swiped through every album and folder. There was nothing. No beach days, no dinners, no selfies. Just the most recent pictures, food I took moments ago, the piles of laundry, the dimly lit corners of the apartment. I tapped the messaging app next. I was sure the conversation I had with Daniel the day before was saved somewhere. The one where I had confronted him about the photos. But the thread was gone, just like the others. That lively exchange, full of our typical banter, was nowhere to be found. My fingers trembled. I opened the phone settings, checked the backup, and scrolled through the cloud storage. Nothing. No archive, no backup, no trace. It was as if someone had meticulously wiped the entire history, our shared life disappearing piece by piece. I wanted to scream, to call Daniel and demand answers. But when I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking as I begged him to call me back. I needed to understand what was happening. Was my mind fracturing? Was I losing grip on who we were? The silence that followed was suffocating. Hours later, Daniel returned, his expression unreadable as he stepped through the door. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he dropped his bag and went straight to the kitchen. I looked through the albums, I said, my voice hollow. The photos from the lake trip, they're all gone. He shrugged, not looking at me. You probably deleted them by mistake. No, I said, stepping closer. I didn't. And the messages, our conversations, they're gone too. Every trace, Daniel. How is that possible? He finally met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, regret. Fear? But then he masked it with indifference. Maybe it's better if you forget. You're not well, and maybe these memories are just a product of that. I felt a chill spread through me. That wasn't just dismissal anymore. It was something colder, calculating. Are you doing this? I demanded. Are you erasing parts of my life? Why would you do that? He shook his head slowly. I'm trying to protect you from what? I don't know. Maybe from yourself. I backed away, my heart pounding. There was no ghost, no supernatural force twisting reality. It was something far worse, someone close to me, deliberately erasing fragments of my life. And the thought that the person I trusted most could do this made the air around me feel heavier, suffocating. That night, I lay awake, scanning the darkened room for signs of normalcy, looking for something, anything, that could anchor me to reality. But the apartment felt different. The photos were gone, the messages vanished, and Daniel's silence was louder than any scream. I didn't know what to believe anymore, except that the world I'd known was slipping away, one erased memory at a time. The next morning arrived with a brittle light that barely pierced the gray sky outside. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, my hands tracing the outlines of objects I once knew intimately, now alien and cold beneath my fingertips. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a question I dared not ask aloud. The absence of Daniel was a void that echoed louder than any presence ever could. I found myself drawn to the small kitchen window, staring out at the street below where life continued with indifferent rhythm. People passed by, bundled against the chill, their conversations drifting up faintly, a reminder that the world outside my fractured bubble was moving forward, uncaring of the fractures within. My phone vibrated once, twice, and then fell silent again. I didn't have the strength to check. Messages, calls, none of it mattered. I was untethered, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The silence was a cruel companion, its weight pressing down on my chest. Hours blurred into an indistinct haze. At some point, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror by the hallway, pale, hollow-eyed, someone I barely recognized. The person staring back seemed trapped behind a pane of glass, unreachable and frozen. I wanted to scream, to shatter that glass and reclaim myself, but the sound caught in my throat, swallowed by the void left behind. Slowly, the rational part of me began to claw its way back. If Daniel had erased everything, then there had to be a reason, some truth buried beneath his silence, beneath the lies. I resolved then to seek answers, no matter how painful they might be. I would find him, confront him, and demand the fragments of my shattered trust. Grabbing the small notebook I had stashed away during better days, I flipped through pages filled with half-remembered moments and scribbled thoughts. Names, places, dates, all the breadcrumbs I might follow. The path ahead was uncertain, but standing still was no longer an option. As I stepped out into the cold air, the weight on my chest remained, but beneath it flickered a fragile ember of resolve. The world might be slipping away, but I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The moment I opened the front door that evening, I sensed something was off. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. Instead, he set the mug down with a deliberate clink and finally looked up, his expression unreadable. I tried to shake off the unease crawling up my spine. Lately, I'd learned that any confrontation with Daniel about the memories or the things I was certain had happened led us here, a cold silence, a dance of denial, and then something changed. The world around me shifted, and I felt like I was unraveling. "Daniel, I want to talk," I said, moving toward the table. "About last weekend." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Which part?" "All of it. The hike, the photos, the dinner at Liam's place. You said those things never happened." "That's because they didn't," he said flatly. I swallowed hard. This was new, the bluntness, the finality. The last few times I confronted him, he'd been evasive, dismissive even, but this time it felt like a wall. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it. "Look here." I tapped the gallery app open. "Remember these?" "You're in all of them." I scrolled to the weekend album I'd painstakingly curated when I first noticed the gaps. He leaned over casually, but instead of looking down at the screen, he stared past me, out the window. "I don't see any of that," Daniel said. I blinked. The images were there, clear as day, me smiling, Daniel laughing, the little park where we'd stopped for coffee. I tapped on a photo, and suddenly the screen went black. I unlocked the phone again, heart racing. The album was gone. "No," I whispered. "It was right here." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe your phone glitched." I clenched my jaw. "It's not my phone. It's this whole thing. The photos, the texts, the conversations we had. You tell me they never happened, but they did." He folded his arms. "Maybe you want them to have happened." The skepticism in his voice sounded like a challenge. I was out of options. My mind was screaming for an explanation, and nothing he said made sense. Why would I invent all this? What would I gain? He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the living room, where the wall was bare. I frowned and walked over. Yesterday, there had been a framed photo of us on that spot, the one we took at Liam's party, smiling under the string lights. Now, the frame was gone. There was a faint outline on the wall, where the picture must have hung, but no sign of it anywhere else in the apartment. I touched the wall reverently, as if it might reveal some secret. "Did you take it down?" I asked slowly. "No," Daniel replied. "I didn't touch anything." That was impossible. The photo had been there this morning when I left for work. I was certain of it. Yet now, it had vanished. I sank into the couch, the room suddenly feeling colder. "This is what I mean," I said. "Every time I bring this up, something disappears or changes. You say it never happened, and then parts of my world or world shift and vanish." Daniel finally met my eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind his calm mask. Doubt, maybe, or guilt. "Am I going crazy?" I asked, my voice cracking. He stood up and walked over to me, hesitating before he spoke. "I don't know. Maybe you're stressed. Maybe something's been affecting you more than you realize." "Like what?" I pushed. He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know." "I'm sorry," he said, and then looked away. The apology felt hollow, like a rehearsed line. But it was the closest thing to an admission I'd gotten. I looked around the apartment again, eyes scanning every surface, every corner. It was as if the life we built together was being erased in real time, and I was powerless to stop it. I stood and walked to the kitchen counter, pulling open a drawer. I rifled through the papers and receipts we kept there. Last week's grocery list, a few bills, but no sign of the small envelope I kept. Inside were the printed copies of our messages, the texts I'd saved when I still hoped to prove to Daniel that the memories were real. I searched again, more frantically this time, dumping the contents onto the floor. Nothing. "Daniel," I said, voice rising. "Where's my envelope?" He was behind me now, his breath warm on my neck. "Maybe you misplaced it," he suggested softly. I spun around. "Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know where it is." "I'm not pretending," he said evenly, but there was a hardness in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. The truth was settling over me like a shroud. This wasn't random. Someone was erasing my reality. And the only person who had access to all these fragments of my life was sitting right in front of me. "Have you been deleting things? Photos? Messages? Stuff in the apartment?" I asked, voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Daniel hesitated, then said, "I told you, I don't know what you're talking about." But I caught the sudden shift in his expression, the tightness around his mouth, the flicker of impatience, and I knew he was lying. I sank back onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. "Why?" I whispered. "Why do this to me?" Daniel sat down beside me, too close, the tension growing between us like static. "Because you're losing it," he said quietly. "Because the more you cling to these memories, the more you push me away." I shook my head. "This isn't about you or me. It's about what's real." He stared at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly. "Maybe you should see someone," he said, voice cold. "A professional." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that this wasn't in my head. But part of me was starting to wonder if he was right. The constant shifts, the disappearing evidence, it was driving me insane. Before he left the room, Daniel turned back. "I love you. But this has got to stop." As he closed the bedroom door behind him, I felt more alone than ever. I sat there in the dim light, the silence of the apartment pressing in. The photos, the messages, the memories, they were vanishing piece by piece. And with every fragment lost, so was my sense of self. Because if I couldn't trust my own reality, what was left? I pulled out my phone again and opened the gallery. Nothing but a blank screen stared back at me. I didn't know if I was breaking or if someone was meticulously erasing my life. But I knew one thing for sure, this fight was far from over. Story 2, Unseen Stalker, the Invisible Pursuer. I first noticed the figure about 2 weeks ago. But then it happened again. That afternoon, I was walking to the coffee shop a few blocks away. The streets were unusually empty for a Wednesday. As I crossed the intersection, I felt that same prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I glanced to my right and saw the vague outline of a person standing across the street, half hidden in the shadow cast by a closed storefront. The figure didn't move, didn't step into the light, just stayed there. I blinked and looked again, and it was gone. The street was empty except for me and a stray cat slinking behind a dumpster. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. The city can play tricks on your eyes, especially on dull days. But the feeling settled in my chest like a stone, cold and heavy, and I couldn't shake it. Over the next several days, the sightings grew more frequent. Whenever I left my apartment, no matter the time or destination, the same shadowy figure was there, just out of clear sight, always at the periphery. I caught glimpses on the stairwell, near the corner store, across the street from the laundromat. Each time, when I turned to get a better look, there was no one. Not a trace. And when I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of the spots where I'd seen the figure, the images showed only empty sidewalks and vacant storefronts. I started to keep a record, noting the time and location of each sighting, hoping to find a pattern. But there wasn't one. The figure appeared at different times of day, in different neighborhoods, places I'd hardly ever been before. It wasn't someone I knew or someone I'd seen around the block. Just there. The strangest part was that no one else seemed to notice. I mentioned it to my neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the building for years. She smiled politely and changed the subject. I asked a coworker if they'd seen anything unusual around the neighborhood. They looked at me like I was joking. "You're imagining things," they said. Maybe I was. But every time I stepped outside, the feeling came back, a thin, creeping unease that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to rush through my errands, avoiding looking over my shoulder, but the figure was always there. Just out of reach, just out of frame. One evening, I decided to test it. I went for a walk around the block, phone in hand, ready to catch the figure on camera if it appeared. I paced slowly, eyes scanning every shadow, every alleyway. Halfway down the block, I spotted the silhouette again. It stood near a lamppost on the corner, shrouded in darkness. I raised my phone and took a photo. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just stayed there. I took a step closer and snapped another picture. When I looked at the images, my breath caught in my throat. Neither showed anything but the empty street, the flickering streetlight casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. No figure. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Who was this person? Why were they following me? And why was there no proof? That night, I barely slept. I left my window slightly cracked, but I kept the blinds drawn tight. Every noise outside made me jump, a distant car, a dog barking, footsteps echoing down the pavement. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some guy who liked to lurk in shadows or a random stranger who had no idea his presence was unsettling me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. There was no handwriting, just a simple message typed on a piece of paper. "I know where you are." My hands trembled as I picked it up. The note was unsigned, no indication of who left it or why. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my pocket, then looked out the peephole. The hallway was empty. I debated calling the police but hesitated. What would I say? That I was being followed by a shadow nobody else could see? That there were no photos, no evidence, only a feeling? The thought of explaining all this sounded ridiculous. Besides, what if it was someone I knew, someone who wanted to scare me? Could the cops do anything without proof? Instead, I started locking every door and window, double-checking the chains on my apartment door. I told my friends to check in with me regularly, even though I hated sounding paranoid. I stopped taking my usual routes and tried to vary my schedule, hoping to throw whoever was watching me off balance. But the figure never stopped appearing. Yesterday, on my way home, I caught it again, standing beneath the flickering neon sign of a closed diner. The figure was motionless, head slightly tilted, like it was studying me. I froze for a moment, then glanced down at my phone. The screen was cracked, the battery nearly dead, but I raised it and snapped a picture anyway. Nothing. When I looked up, the figure had disappeared. I didn't run, though. I just walked slowly home, every step heavy with dread. I kept my head down, ears straining for the slightest sound. I felt trapped in my apartment, in my life. The city that once felt familiar and safe now seemed foreign and hostile, every shadow a potential threat. I don't know who is following me or why, but I'm certain of one thing: I'm not imagining it. This is real. And whatever this is, It's not going to stop until it gets what it wants. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. The mornings were the worst. One day, about a week after the first sighting, I left my apartment around 7:15 a.m., the city still waking up. I took my usual path to the subway station, walking down the cracked sidewalk past the dry cleaner and the newsstand. That's when I caught it again, a flicker of something moving at the corner of my eye. I stopped, heart thudding in my chest, and turned. The street was vacant. No cars, no people, just the usual scattered trash fluttering in the breeze. I pulled out my phone and tried to catch the figure on camera, hoping to prove to myself it wasn't just paranoia. But like before, the screen showed nothing but empty streets and empty sidewalks. I even doubled back to the spot where I'd seen the figure, but there was no one there. Just an old lamppost with peeling paint and a cluster of pigeons fluttering away into the sky. That day, I told my friend Max about it over lunch. He listened, eyebrows knitting together like I'd told him I'd lost my mind. "Maybe you're stressed," he suggested. "Work has been killing you lately." And maybe he was right. The past month had been brutal, deadlines, long nights, and constant pressure. But I was certain of what I'd seen. This wasn't stress-induced hallucination. It was something else. I started paying more attention. I tried to catch the figure at different times of day, in the morning, midday, late afternoon, even at night. The figure seemed to prefer the quieter parts of the neighborhood, the alley behind the bakery, the back entrance to the grocery store, the shadowy stairwell beside the old apartment complex across the street. Always just out of clear sight. Always gone the moment I looked straight at it. One evening, after a late shift at work, I took a detour through the park. The area was mostly deserted except for a few joggers and a couple walking their dog. As I rounded a bend near the fountain, I caught that familiar flicker again. This time, it was closer, maybe 15 feet away, standing beneath a tree whose branches blocked the streetlight. I stopped, holding my breath, and looked directly at the spot. Nothing. Not a soul. I felt a cold finger of fear creeping up my spine. This wasn't random. Whoever this was, they were following me. Watching me. I thought about calling the police but hesitated. What would I say? There's a shadowy figure stalking me, but when I turn around, they vanish. They'd probably think I was nuts or trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. Still, I had to do something. The next day, I bought a small notebook and started jotting down every time I saw the figure: date, time, location, description. It felt like trying to solve a puzzle without knowing what the picture was supposed to be. Over the week, the sightings increased in frequency. Sometimes it was just a flicker near a corner store, other times it lingered longer, standing near the entrance of my building or across the street from my favorite cafe. The figure never approached me directly, never made any move that felt overtly threatening. But the constant surveillance was disconcerting. I felt like I was being hunted, like a mouse in a trap. One afternoon, I decided to test a theory. I changed my routine. Instead of taking the usual street to work, I cut through a different neighborhood, one bustling with people, noise, and traffic. I expected maybe the figure would lose me or not follow. But no. As I crossed the busy intersection near the bookstore, I caught it again, a silhouette just standing in the shadow of a construction site. The street hummed with life around it. Cars honked, people chatted and bustled past. But the figure stayed still. I felt a sudden rush of panic and broke into a run. My breath came fast and ragged as I rounded the corner. When I looked back, the street was empty again. That night, I barely slept. The images of the figure kept flashing in my mind. I didn't know if I was being stalked, surveilled, or if this was some kind of twisted game. Or maybe it wasn't a game at all. Maybe I was in danger. I decided to buy a small security camera and set it up in my apartment hallway, pointing toward the front door. If someone was lurking out there, maybe I could catch them on tape. I stayed up late, waiting for something. Anything. But the hallway remained silent, empty. The next day, when I came home, I checked the footage. Nothing had moved except the flickering shadows from the hallway light. Frustrated, I realized the figure was always outdoors, just beyond the building's edge. I considered talking to my neighbors, but I was too embarrassed. What if they thought I was overreacting? What if they thought I was paranoid? The next sighting happened that evening as I left for a late grocery run. The street was dimly lit, the usual hum of city noise softened under the blanket of night. I caught the figure standing across the street, its dark shape blending into the shadows near the entrance to the bus stop. I froze for a moment, heart pounding, before slowly raising my phone to take a picture. As always, the image showed only empty pavement and the flickering streetlight. I put the phone down and looked back. The figure was gone. But this time, as I started walking again, I heard footsteps behind me. Soft at first, then steadily growing louder. My pulse quickened, and I glanced over my shoulder to see a man average height, covered in a dark jacket, his face obscured by a cap pulled low. I stopped in my tracks. He stopped too, several feet behind me. "Hey," he said, voice low but steady. "You dropped this." He held out a small folded piece of paper. I hesitated, my mind racing with suspicion. But I reached out and took it. "Thanks," I said quietly. He nodded once and turned, walking away sharply into the darkness. I unfolded the paper carefully. Written in messy, hurried handwriting were just 2 words, "Be careful." I didn't know what to make of it. Was this a warning? A threat? Or a cruel prank? That night, I sat in my apartment, the note on my coffee table, the shadows outside my window seeming to grow darker. I knew then that this wasn't just some random figure or a trick of light. Someone was watching. Someone knew something. And I had no idea what it was or why. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to be left alone. Not anytime soon. I knew I couldn't keep letting this go on. Last night was the tipping point. I'd stayed in, hoping the figure would disappear if I ignored it, but as I paced my small living room, I kept catching that same prickling feeling along my spine, that same sense of unease like I was being watched. My phone sat on the table, screen facing up. I'd been considering calling someone, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Instead, I stared at the blank screen until the buzzing started again. Then, just past midnight, I heard a noise outside my window, soft, a scrape against concrete or maybe metal. My building faced a narrow alleyway, the kind of place where trash bins leaned against the brick walls and stray cats found refuge. I pressed my face against the glass and squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing obvious. No figure, no shadow, no movement. Just the usual clutter. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't sleep after that. I kept imagining what the figure might look like if it stepped out of the shadows, what it wanted, and why it wouldn't just show itself outright. There was no supernatural element here. No ghosts or monsters with glowing eyes. Just a person, human, real, close enough to make me feel like a mouse trapped in a corner. This morning, I decided I had to be proactive. I needed to find out who was following me, or at least confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I grabbed my coat and headed out, my phone already recording video. I figured that if the figure was truly there, maybe I could catch it on camera this time. Crossing the street, I kept my eyes glued to every corner, every shadow, every darkened doorway. The city was quiet, almost subdued. The usual morning rush had been replaced by a hollow emptiness that made the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. As I walked, I caught that flicker again, the brief outline, the subtle shift in the corner of my eye. My heart hammered. I stopped and spun around, but there was only empty sidewalk, the fluttering leaves of a sycamore tree, and a stray newspaper tumbling in the breeze. I called out, voice low and tentative. "Who's there?" Silence. The only response was the distant wail of a siren and the hum of a passing car. I kept moving, more wary now. I passed the corner store, the place where I'd glimpsed a figure a few days earlier. I stopped outside, glancing up and down the narrow street, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I hit record and trained the camera on the dark alley beside the building. Nothing moved. No one appeared. The screen showed nothing but an empty alley, litter scattered across the cracked pavement. I lowered the phone and sighed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not the usual city noise, distant and indistinct. These were deliberate, slow, measured steps, someone walking with purpose. I froze. Turning slowly, I faced the street. There, a few yards away, stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was obscured partly by shadow and partly by the cap's brim, but he was very much real. For a moment, we just looked at each other. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and something else, curiosity, maybe. Who was he? Why had he been following me? I took a cautious step back. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He said nothing. Instead, his head tilted slightly, as if assessing me. Then, almost imperceptibly, he began to walk away. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to call after him, to demand answers. But instinct told me to stay put. He disappeared around the corner, swallowed by the early morning shadows. I stood there for a long time, heart racing, before finally turning and heading back to my apartment. Once inside, I locked the door and drew the curtains tight. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, replaying the moment over and over. The figure was real. Not a trick of my imagination. But why me? I thought back to the past few weeks. Small things that didn't make sense before suddenly felt sinister. A misplaced key near my door, the faint smell of cigarette smoke when I knew no one smoked in my building, the way the locks on my apartment door sometimes seemed just a little loose. Could someone have been watching me for longer than I realized? That afternoon, I decided to visit the police station. It was a long shot. I knew they probably wouldn't take me seriously, but I needed to report what was happening. I needed to feel like I was doing something. As I sat across from the officer, I explained everything, the figure, the footsteps, the noises outside my window. She listened carefully, making notes. Then she told me the usual: be vigilant, don't go out alone late at night, report any suspicious activity. I nodded, but she didn't seem to grasp the full weight of what I was telling her. Neither did I. Walking back to my apartment, I felt exposed. I wanted to tell someone else, friends, coworkers, but how do you explain the creeping dread of being watched by someone who never reveals themselves? How do you convince people that the fear isn't just in your head? That evening, I installed a small security camera outside my door. It wasn't much, but it was something. If the figure was lurking near my building, maybe I could catch it on tape. Hours later, I sat in the darkened room, eyes fixed on the monitor. Nothing. Just the empty hallway, the flickering light overhead. The silence was suffocating. Then, around midnight, the screen flickered. A shadow moved. Slowly, deliberately, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. The same dark coat, the same baseball cap, the same broad shoulders. I held my breath. The figure lingered for a moment, then moved forward, coming into clearer view. I could see his face now, sharp angles, pale skin, eyes that flicked toward the camera with a cold, calculating gleam. Then he reached out and pressed something against the camera lens. The screen went dark. My heart dropped. I rushed to the door, locked it 3 times, and sat down, trembling. For the first time, I realized this wasn't random. This was personal. Someone was watching me, tracking me, and they wanted me to know they were there. I didn't know what they wanted. But I knew one thing: I wasn't safe. And that realization settled over me like a heavy, suffocating fog. I kept the lights on all night, my phone clutched in my hand, ready for anything. But when dawn came, the figure was gone. For now. I had started keeping my phone out whenever I left the apartment, camera app open, ready to snap a quick photo or record if needed. By the 4th morning, I was running late for work. I grabbed my bag and headed out the door in a rush. The building's stairwell was unusually quiet. No familiar clatter of other residents or the faint drone of TV from apartments above. I pressed the elevator button and waited. That was when I first noticed it again. Out of the corner of my eye, on the landing just below mine, a dark shape moved quickly, disappearing behind the stairwell's metal railing. I froze, heart pounding. I waited, holding my breath, eyes fixed on the spot. Nothing reappeared. No footsteps, no sound. I stepped closer, peered down into the dimly lit stairwell. The landing was empty. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, descending cautiously, my phone camera held at the ready. Each floor I passed, I glanced into the dark corners, every shadow. But the stairwell remained empty. Outside on the street, the city seemed the same, unchanged and indifferent. The usual bustle of morning commuters, the honking of impatient drivers, the distant wail of sirens. But I felt on edge, like I was being watched. I decided to change my usual route to work. Instead of the direct path down Main Street, I turned left onto 5th Avenue. This street was less busy but had more small businesses and narrow alleys. The figure had appeared near a corner store once, so I figured maybe a change would help me catch a clearer glimpse. I walked with my phone out, camera app open, recording video this time. My eyes scanned every dark corner, every alleyway, every storefront shadow. About halfway down 5th, I saw it again. A dark figure stood just beyond the edge of the sidewalk, behind a newspaper kiosk. The silhouette was hunched, almost like someone trying to stay invisible, blending into the shadows cast by the morning sun. I froze, heart thudding loudly in my ears. I slowly turned my phone toward the shape, but the figure immediately stepped back, disappearing behind the kiosk. I caught only a glimpse, tall, thin, wearing a hooded jacket that obscured the face. I raised my phone to record, voice shaking. "Hey! Who's there?" No reply. Only the distant hum of city life. Instinct told me to keep moving, but I felt rooted in place. Suddenly, the kiosk door slammed open. A man stepped out. He was middle-aged, average height, dressed in a worn coat. His eyes locked on me, steady and unreadable. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice low but calm. I hesitated. "No. Just walking." He nodded, taking a step closer. "You don't belong around here." The words hit me like a cold slap. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I live nearby. I'm just on my way to work." He smiled thinly. "This neighborhood's changing. People like you don't know how to behave here anymore." I felt a sharp instinct to leave, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just passing through." He scanned me, then his expression softened slightly. "All right. But watch yourself. People have been, he glanced over his shoulder, voice dropping to a whisper. People have been watching. I wanted to ask who, but he turned and walked back into the kiosk, shutting the door behind him. I stood there, phone still recording, mind racing. The figure I'd seen was gone. I kept recording as I walked away, heart racing and pulse hammering in my ears. My detour felt like a trap. Back at work, I played the video over and over. The figure was there, briefly, but the footage was grainy and quick. No clear features. No clear proof. That night, I sat in my apartment, windows open despite the chill. I replayed the day in my head, every glance, every fleeting glimpse. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the man was part of some neighborhood watch, or a security guard. Maybe the figure was someone avoiding trouble, or just a drifter. But I couldn't shake the heavy feeling in my gut that I was being stalked. The next day, I took a different approach. I decided to talk to some neighbors. I knocked on the door next to mine. A woman in her 60s answered, smiling politely. I explained briefly about the figure. She frowned. You're not the first to say something about that. Some folks have seen a man hanging around late at night, watching the building. Do you know who he is? I asked. She shook her head. No, and no one's reported it. People are scared to get involved. It wasn't comforting. Later, I spoke with the doorman in my building, an older man named Craig. Have you seen anyone suspicious? I asked. Craig shrugged. I keep an eye, but nothing concrete. Sometimes folks like to lurk, make people nervous. I'll keep an extra lookout though. I thanked him, but the unease didn't ease. That night, I double-checked all my locks and closed the blinds. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I stepped out again, determined to keep my guard up. As I locked the apartment door, I caught that shadow at the edge of my vision again, just a flash against the hallway wall. I spun around. Nothing. My heart was racing. I gripped my phone tighter and hurried down the stairs. Outside, the street was busy, filled with the usual morning crowd. No sign of the figure. I walked briskly, eyes scanning. At the corner store, I saw movement. A man, tall and thin, leaning against the brick wall. His hood up, head down. I stopped, voice firm. Who are you? He looked up, eyes sharp and cold. Mind your own business, he said and turned away. I followed a few steps. Why are you following me? He stopped, glancing over his shoulder. I'm not following you, he said. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Why do you keep watching me? He shrugged, expression unreadable. Then he smirked. Maybe I'm just curious. The moment hung between us, tense and heavy. I wanted to yell, to report him, to run. But I just turned and walked away. That was the first time I saw him clearly. And the uncertainty of his intentions terrified me more than any shadow. I realized then that this wasn't random or accidental. Someone was watching me. And whoever he wasn't going to stop anytime soon. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if something about this figure was deliberately toying with me. Yesterday was the worst. I was at the corner store picking up some milk when I caught that familiar flicker in the corner of my eye. The figure stood just beyond the row of parked cars, half concealed by an alleyway's shadows. My heart hammered. I stared hard, willing myself to get a good look. The silhouette didn't move, but the shape it made was unmistakably human, tall, lanky, and unnervingly still. I whipped around, expecting to catch them in the act of retreating or watching me. Nothing. Just empty pavement and dull bricks. No one. My phone camera showed only an empty street when I checked. I felt exposed and vulnerable, like the city had flipped on me and was suddenly hostile. By the time I got home, my nerves were frayed. I locked the door and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to breathe evenly. My mind raced through every logical possibility. Maybe it was a stalker, someone watching me, or a stranger who had fixated on me for some reason. But who? Why me? I'd always been careful, kept to myself, and avoided trouble. I decided then that I needed more information. If I was being followed, I wanted to know who it was. I couldn't keep living with this gnawing dread. I set up my phone on the windowsill, recording the street outside while I sat quietly, watching for any signs of movement. For an hour, the street stayed empty, nothing but the distant hum of traffic and a few pedestrians. No shadowy figure. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the apartment sounded like footsteps. Every flicker of light through the blinds seemed like a signal. I wondered if I should have told someone, my sister, a neighbor, even the police, but I feared sounding paranoid or being dismissed. This morning I left early, hoping to catch the figure off guard. I snapped my phone on, camera ready, and headed down the stairs with a new sense of purpose. The city was waking up, more alive than it had been when I first noticed the figure. Still, the streets felt oddly empty in the spots where I'd seen it before. As I reached the corner near the laundromat, I caught a glimpse of movement. The figure, there it was again, standing near the entrance to a narrow alley. It was closer than before, almost within clear sight, but still shrouded in shadow. I paused and watched, heart thudding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. This time, the figure shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that felt more like a signal than an accident. I stepped forward, and the figure turned its head slightly, away from me, but I caught the faint outline of a face beneath a hood. I raised my phone, pressing record. The figure didn't run. Instead, it took a step into the street, moving with a confidence that sent chills down my spine. I started to walk closer, trying to stay calm, to not show fear. The figure didn't flee but kept walking away, never turning fully to look at me. I followed for about 2 blocks, keeping a safe distance. Then the figure disappeared down a side street, swallowed by a cluster of buildings. I stopped, breathless, and checked my phone. The screen was dark except for the faint outline of empty streets. No sign of the figure. It was as though it had vanished. I felt a cold wave wash over me. This wasn't a coincidence or a trick of the light. Someone was deliberately following me, stalking my movements. The question was what they wanted and how long they'd been doing it. I knew then I couldn't stay silent any longer. I called my sister and asked if she could come over, even just to sit with me for a while. I didn't want to be alone tonight, not with the figure lurking somewhere close, watching and waiting. As I waited for her, I took a deep breath and forced myself to review everything I'd noticed. The figure's movements, the times it appeared, the places it lingered. Patterns I hadn't seen before started to form in my mind, routes I took that overlapped with the figure's appearances, times I left the apartment that matched when it showed up. The thought made my skin crawl. It wasn't random. They knew where I went. They were learning my habits, studying me. When my sister arrived, I showed her the recordings and told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment, then said we needed to involve the police. I hesitated, worried about making things worse or being dismissed as paranoid, but I could see the concern in her eyes. I knew she was right. We made a plan to report the stalking, and she stayed with me late into the night. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the quiet terror unfolding in my apartment. But inside, I felt a little less alone. For now. Tomorrow, I would face this head-on. I couldn't keep running from shadows that weren't imaginary. I didn't know who was behind the figure or what they wanted, but I was done waiting to find out. As dawn broke, I steeled myself for the day ahead. The police would listen, evidence in hand, and maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would begin to unravel. But deep down, I knew the path wouldn't be simple. Trust was fragile now, and every step forward felt like walking a tightrope over darkness. Story 3, Dead End Detour, Haunted GPS Terror. I was driving home late that night, the highway stretching out ahead like a ribbon of black silk, the dashed lines glowing faintly under my headlights. I had left the office hours earlier than usual, hoping to beat the cold front that was rolling in. The sky had been clear when I started, but now clouds had thickened, blotting out the stars and leaving the world in a muted shade of gray. The air inside the car felt heavy, the silence stretching thin. I reached to adjust the temperature, but the heater was barely making a dent. The cold crept in through the windows and settled in my bones. My GPS suddenly spoke up again, the voice a little less steady than before. In 500 feet, turn right. I frowned. The road ahead was a straight shot for miles. There was no right turn in sight. I kept driving. Then the voice repeated, turn right now. I pulled over onto the shoulder, heart picking up. The screen had changed, the usual map view replaced by a sparse, almost blank display. No towns, no street names, no signs of civilization. Just a thin gray line turning sharply to the right, leading off the main highway onto a narrow road I had never seen. I shook my head, muttering under my breath. GPS glitches happen sometimes, especially late at night and in rural areas. I rebooted the device, waited for the signal to catch up. When the map reloaded, it still showed the same turn. I glanced at the clock, 11:30. I didn't want to argue with the GPS, but something about this felt off. The road I turned onto was narrower, the pavement cracked and uneven. Trees closed in on either side, their skeletal branches reaching over the hood of the car like dark, grasping fingers. The headlights barely penetrated the shadows. I felt a chill unrelated to the cold air. The silence was different here, thicker, heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. After a few minutes, the GPS tinkered again. Turn left in 300 feet. I followed the directions, even though the signs were absent, and the road felt more like a barely used backcountry lane than anything mapped. The trees gave way now and then to open fields, empty and dim under the moonless sky. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. I reached over, heart racing. A text from an unknown number, nice drive. I stared at the screen, mind blank for a moment before I locked the phone and shoved it into the glove box. No one knew I was on that road, not my friends, not my family, not even my work. How had someone tracked me? The GPS didn't pause. Turn right in 800 feet. I obeyed, hands tight on the steering wheel, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road grew rougher, patches of gravel and dirt cutting into the pavement. There were no streetlights, no houses, no signs, just endless trees, black and silent. The edges of my vision seemed to narrow, the headlights illuminating less and less of the road ahead. I felt trapped in a tunnel of night and shadow. Then the GPS recalculated again. Turn around when possible. I pulled over onto a narrow shoulder, heart pounding. The screen now showed a complicated path, a maze of unmarked and unpaved roads branching off in every direction. I tried to exit the navigation, but the device was unresponsive, seemingly locked in this endless reroute. A sudden noise startled me, a twig snapping behind the car. I froze, scanning the darkness through the rear window. Nothing moved. No headlights, no figure. Just stillness. I realized then that I was no longer just lost. Someone was out there. My mind raced. Was it a prank? Stalker? something worse. The GPS had become a weapon, a tool to isolate me, to strip away any chance of safety. I gripped the steering wheel faster, the chill growing more than just cold air now. The voice on the GPS was still speaking, but the calm was gone, replaced by something colder, more insistent. "Continue straight," it said. "You're almost there." Almost where? I didn't want to find out. But turning back seemed impossible. The roads behind me had vanished beneath the trees. I took a deep breath and pressed the accelerator down, the tires crunching on gravel as I moved forward into the dark unknown. The headlights sliced through the thickening fog, revealing twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. My pulse quickened as the GPS voice shifted again, now whispering rather than directing. "Not far, just beyond the bend." The road curved sharply, disappearing into an abyss of shadows that no light could penetrate. My grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white. Suddenly, the engine stuttered, sputtering as if protesting the relentless path ahead. Panic flared, but I forced myself to stay calm. The dashboard flickered, and then the GPS screen went black, silent, lifeless. I was alone. No signal, no guidance, just the suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. A faint glow caught my eye from the corner of the windshield, a flicker like candlelight, wavering between the trees. My heart hammered as I slowed, straining to see if it was real or just my imagination. The glow pulsed again, steady this time, beckoning. Against every instinct, I turned off the road, aiming the car toward that fragile beacon. Somewhere beyond, whatever awaited was waiting for me to arrive. I hesitated, fingers gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Still, the screen showed the arrow, sharp and clear, directing me off the highway and onto that narrow, unmarked road. The cold in the car seeped deeper as I sat there, windows fogging slightly. I noticed the heater wasn't working right anymore, just a weak puff, no warmth. The night was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional scrape of tires on gravel. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Almost midnight. My phone had only a sliver of service, the signal bouncing in and out. I tried calling a friend, but the call dropped before it connected. Frustrated, I shut the phone off and turned back to the GPS screen. The right turn was just ahead, maybe a couple 100 feet down a shoulder that barely existed. I looked out the window, but there was no sign of any turn, no streetlights, no reflective signs, nothing but trees and darkness. I took a deep breath and made the turn. The tires crunching on dirt and gravel felt wrong under the car, which was meant mostly for pavement. The road was narrow, overgrown in places, and pitch black except for my headlights piercing through the branches ahead. The GPS voice became calmer, but the map itself only showed a thin gray line twisting deeper into what looked like forest. I had no idea where I was, not a single familiar landmark. Usually the GPS would display street names, or at least the names of towns nearby. Now it was just this void, no labels, no markers, no help at all. I tried to shake off the unease settling in my chest. Maybe this was just some weird software error, a glitch in the system that rerouted me through a shortcut I had never heard of. But I had never driven this way before, not in all the years I'd lived in this area. Then the screen flickered for a second. I blinked. The map shifted slightly, zooming in so close I could see just a few feet of the road ahead. The voice repeated its instructions again, clearer this time. Turn left in 300 feet. I swallowed hard. There was no intersection for miles. The road curved gently, but there was no sign of a left turn. I kept driving, hoping the GPS would reset. Instead, the screen went black for a moment. When it came back, it showed a route through a series of small, unnamed roads and dirt paths, one after the other, weaving through thick woods I recognized only vaguely. The names had disappeared completely, and the voice now sounded almost bored, like it was reading from a script disconnected from reality. I pulled over again, this time onto a slightly wider clearing just off the road. The car's headlights illuminated a patch of undergrowth and trees so dense it felt like the woods themselves were closing in. I reached for my phone and turned it back on. The signal was still weak, but a single notification popped up, a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "You're off the highway now." My hands trembled. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. How did they know that? Who had been watching me? I backed out of the clearing slowly and turned the wheel back onto the narrow road. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get back to the main highway, but the GPS voice had changed tone. It was no longer a neutral assistant. It had become almost commanding. In 200 feet, turn right. I glanced in the rearview mirror, suddenly hyper-aware of the road behind me. The highway was nowhere in sight. The darkness swallowed everything beyond the thin beam of the headlights. Then I saw it. A pair of headlights. Far behind, but moving steadily in my direction. Not close enough to be a coincidence. Whoever was following me was doing it deliberately, matching my every move. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat. The car behind slowed too, then stopped. The headlights vanished when the driver cut them off, leaving me staring into darkness. I sat frozen for a long moment, gripping the wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Then the GPS voice came back, slow and deliberate, "Continue straight ahead." I wanted to argue, to find some way to get off this route, but the screen showed only one option. There was no escape. I took a deep breath and pressed the gas pedal again. The road wound on, narrower and more overgrown with every mile. The trees pressed closer, branches scraping against the windows. My headlights caught a flash of something just beyond the edge of the road, a shadow moving between the trees. Or just a trick of the light. The heater sputtered and died. The car's interior grew colder, the air damp and heavy. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I had kept a jacket within reach. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "You can't hide." I swallowed, staring at the message like it was a curse. Who was this? How did they know where I was? I tried calling the police, dialing 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal. Only the silent night pressed in from all sides. Minutes passed with the constant thrum of the engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. Then, out of nowhere, the GPS rerouted again. "Turn left in 100 feet, it said. I forced the wheel left, the car skidding slightly on loose dirt. The road ended at a small clearing, empty except for an abandoned, rusting pickup truck half hidden under a tarp. The air smelled of oil and wet leaves. I killed the engine and sat in silence, heart racing. I looked in the rearview mirror again and spotted movement, shapes shifting among the trees at the edge of the clearing. Figures standing, watching. I unlocked the doors, my fingers shaking. The lock sound echoed in the stillness. A twig snapped behind me. I whipped my head around. No one was there. I was alone. Or so I thought. Then the driver's side door creaked open slowly, the darkness swallowing it like a mouth. My breath caught. I fumbled for the keys, ready to start the car and drive away. But the engine refused to turn over. The keys wouldn't turn. My hands trembled harder as a figure stepped into the light of the headlights. Not a ghost. Not something unexplainable. A man. Tall, wearing a dark jacket that absorbed the light, with eyes colder than the night itself. He smiled slowly, a deliberate, cruel smile. "You shouldn't have come this way," he said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. And right then, I realized I was exactly where he wanted me to be. The night wrapped around my car as I cruised down the endless highway, the faint glow of streetlights flickering like distant fireflies. I thought about turning back, but the highway was miles behind me, and my phone had no signal. It was that or keep moving forward, hoping I'd eventually hit something familiar. Still, the whole thing felt wrong. The way the GPS kept rerouting me, deeper and deeper into nowhere, was too deliberate, too precise. Whoever was behind this knew exactly where I was and where I was going. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The temperature inside the car was dropping again. I pulled my jacket closer around me, trying to block out the creeping chill. Up ahead, the road curved sharply left, disappearing into darkness. I slowed to a crawl and then stopped altogether when I saw a faint glow of headlights behind me. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. The lights weren't visible on the GPS, but here they were, right behind me, moving slowly, almost as if watching. I debated my next move. If I sped up, would they chase me? If I stopped, would they pull alongside, confront me? The air inside the car thickened with tension. I decided to wait. Maybe they'd pass by. But the headlights didn't budge. They stayed just behind me, steady and unblinking. I swallowed hard and flicked the hazard lights on and off. Nothing. The car behind responded in kind, flashing once, then twice. It was a message, but I couldn't tell if it was a warning or a threat. My pulse quickened. I started the car again, easing forward, not too fast, not too slow. The other vehicle mirrored my pace, never gaining ground, never falling behind. I felt like a mouse caught in a trap, running on a wheel that went nowhere. The road wound tighter, trees closing in like sentries, branches scraping against the car windows. Then, suddenly, the GPS beeped, and the screen changed. A new route, even more obscure. The gray line turned sharply right, down a thinner path that looked more like a logging trail than a road. I hesitated. This had to be a mistake. Still, the car behind me didn't hesitate. Its headlights turned right as well, following without question. My mind raced. Whoever was following me wasn't just nearby, they were orchestrating this entire journey, making sure I didn't get to where I was going. But why? What did they want from me? I tried calling someone, anyone. Phone still no signal. The trail narrowed further until the trees pressed so close I could barely see the sky. Patches of moonlight fell in fractured beams, illuminating the twisted roots and rocks that littered the path. I had to slow to a crawl again, the car bouncing painfully over the terrain. Then I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror, a figure stepping out of the other vehicle. My breath froze. The headlights caught the contours of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by shadow and a hooded jacket. He stood still, watching, waiting. Panic surged through me. I hit the accelerator, the wheels spinning on loose dirt. The man didn't move, didn't run to the car, just stood there like a statue, watching me disappear into the darkness. I didn't stop for a long time after that. The GPS continued to reroute me, each time pushing deeper into the wilderness. I could feel the weight of those unseen eyes, the certainty that I was no longer just traveling, I was being hunted. Eventually, the road opened into a clearing. I stopped the car, heart hammering, sweat slick on my forehead despite the cold. The GPS blinked off completely, screen black and lifeless. I sat there, breathing hard, listening. The night was unnervingly quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. The only thing I could hear was the distant, irregular tapping of branches, or was that footsteps. I unlocked the doors, grabbed my phone, and checked for signal one last time. Still nothing. I knew then that I wasn't going anywhere unless I confronted whoever was out there waiting for me. But I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that might mean. The dark settled deeper around me, and I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. Someone had tracked me, monitored my every move, and was determined to keep me from arriving at my destination. There was no way out of this night without facing that reality head-on. I swallowed the lump in my throat, turned off the car, and stepped out into the cold, silent night. The crunch of gravel under my boots echoed louder than I expected, each step feeling heavier as shadows stretched like fingers along the deserted road. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness, but even that small circle of light couldn't chase away the chill crawling up my spine. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a faint rustle suggested I wasn't alone. Someone was watching, waiting. My heart hammered, but I forced myself forward, knowing hesitation was a luxury I couldn't afford. The night air bit at my skin, sharp and unforgiving, but it also cleared my thoughts. Fear was natural, but it couldn't control me, not anymore. I scanned the edge of the forest, searching for movement, for a sign. And then I saw it, a silhouette, barely visible but unmistakably there. No masks, no disguises, just a figure standing still, calm, as if daring me to make the next move. I squared my shoulders and called out, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Who's there? What do you want?" The silence that followed was deafening, filled with unspoken threats and promises. Whatever came next, I was ready. Because standing still was no longer an option. The new route carved out by the GPS was no longer just a detour. It was a descent into a silent, forgotten world. I checked the GPS again. The screen was stark, no names, no landmarks, no helpful markers at all. Just the twisting gray line, urging me deeper into this isolated stretch. I felt the weight of something pressing in from the darkness beyond the edges of the headlights, a sense of being watched that was no longer subtle. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was just tired, imagining things after hours on the road and the creeping cold that never seemed to leave the car. But then, in the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of headlights, dim but steady, far behind me. At first, I thought I had imagined it, or maybe a delivery truck on the same route. But the road was barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. There had been nothing else for miles. The headlights stayed. They didn't flash or speed up, just followed, matching my pace exactly. I adjusted my speed, trying to gauge how close the tail was, but the distance remained the same, like a shadow that refused to disappear. I pulled over to the side, heart pounding in my ears, and killed the engine. The other car did the same, and the headlights vanished in the rearview mirror. I sat still, breath shallow, listening to the night. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just the cold wind leaking through cracks in the window seals. I started the engine again and pressed onward, the GPS now directing me onto an even narrower path, a dirt track barely wide enough for one vehicle. The trees leaned over the road, their branches scratching against the roof, and the mud clung to my tires as I drove cautiously. I knew this was no normal route, it was a trap. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my phone had lost signal hours ago. No bars. No chance of help. I was alone. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw the car again, parked just off the shoulder, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes. The driver's side door was open. A man stood there, his face obscured by shadows, but his posture was unmistakable. He was waiting. I slammed the brakes and reversed a few feet, turning the wheel sharply to head back the way I'd come. The man didn't move. My heart hammered in my chest as I accelerated down the track, tires splashing through puddles, branches whipping against the side mirrors. I glanced back. The car remained where it was, stationary, the door hanging open like a silent invitation. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't random. He knew exactly where I was, where I'd be at every moment. Someone had been tracking me, waiting to make sure I never reached my destination. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to find the main road again, had to get out of this trap. The GPS, though untrustworthy, was still my only guide. I followed its directions, hoping for a break in the maze of isolation. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and the dirt track spat me out onto a barely lit country road. Relief washed over me. This was progress. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The car was gone. I didn't slow down, not even when the GPS rerouted me through one last snarl of narrow, winding roads. I just kept driving, eyes sharp, hands steady on the wheel. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the watcher waited, but I was moving too fast, too alert. Finally, the GPS voice softened. You have arrived at your destination. I pulled into the driveway of the small house where I'd been headed all night. The porch light was off, the windows dark. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, eyes scanning the road behind me. No sign of the car. No footsteps. Just silence. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside, locking it behind me. But even as I closed the door, I knew this wasn't over. Someone had been there, someone who had tracked me all the way here, someone who wouldn't stop until I never arrived at all. The silence inside the house was thick, almost suffocating. I moved slowly through the dim rooms, every creak of the floorboards under my feet sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I flicked on the kitchen light, nothing but the usual clutter, the same coffee mugs I'd left on the counter days ago. But the air felt different, heavier, charged with something unseen. I checked the locks again, double bolting the front door and sliding the chain into place. Then I moved to the windows, pulling the curtains close tighter than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me from the shadows outside, waiting for me to slip up. My phone buzzed on the table. I grabbed it quickly, heart hammering, half expecting some threatening message. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. You're closer than you think. No signature, no hint of who it might be. Just those 6 words that twisted the knife tighter. I dropped the phone onto the counter, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they were playing a game, one I didn't remember agreeing to join. But I wasn't about to lose without a fight. I grabbed the old baseball bat from the closet, silly, maybe, but better than nothing, and made my way to the back door, peeking through the glass. Nothing but darkness. No cars, no figures. Just the quiet hum of the night. Still, I couldn't stay here like this, waiting to be hunted. I needed answers. I needed to find whoever was behind this before they found me again. I pulled on my jacket and headed back to the car, the bat clenched in one hand. The night was far from over, and now, it felt like the beginning of something much worse. I didn't want to believe it at first, not really. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, trying to catch a glimpse of anything behind me, headlights, shadows, a car tailing me at a distance. The 2-lane road I was on was barely a strip of pavement through the woods now, no streetlights, no shoulder, just trees crowding close on either side, their branches scraping faintly against the car as I passed. I'd long since lost sight of the main highway, and my phone signal had dropped to nothing. That sterile GPS voice had gone silent after the last instruction, which was odd, because the little blue dot on the screen kept moving along that blank map, pushing me deeper into the wilderness. The last turn had been onto an unmarked dirt road. I was certain now this was no accident. Whoever was behind this had been tracking me all night, probably had access to some live feed from my phone or car. I'd seen the glint in their eyes, or at least imagined it, someone who knew every move I made, anticipating my decisions. My hands tightened on the wheel. The headlights caught something up ahead, movement, or maybe just a trick of the light. I slowed, heart pounding. The dirt road narrowed into a single lane, flanked by thick brush, and then it curved sharply to the left. I followed, but my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. Nothing. Or at least, nothing I could definitively identify. I wished I had told someone where I was going, but the whole point was to get there undetected. I didn't expect to have a tail, or worse, someone who had hacked into my GPS and was playing cat and mouse. The rational part of me wanted to call the police, but the signal was dead and I was miles from anywhere. The only thing I could do was keep driving, keep alert. The car rattled over uneven ground, the tires crunching on loose gravel. I passed a rusted-out mailbox on a leaning post, though there was no house in sight. The GPS screen was blank now, no map, no instructions. Just a blinking blue dot moving forward. I felt like I was the only person left on Earth. Then my phone buzzed. I jerked, reflexively grabbing it off the seat beside me. A text. No caller ID. No number. Just a message. You shouldn't have come. My breath caught. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. The screen went black. I tapped the power button. Nothing. I chuckled nervously to myself. Of course, it was a prank. Some sick joke. But the timing was too perfect, the tone too deliberate. Someone out there knew exactly where I was. And they'd been waiting. I considered turning around, but the road behind me was just as dark and empty as the one ahead. I was too far in now, and there was no guarantee I could find the highway again. I took a deep breath and kept moving forward. The trees began to thin, and the dirt road stretched out into a small clearing. There was a rundown barn off to the right, its wooden boards warped and decaying. Faint light spilled out from a window, flickering like a candle in the night. My stomach tightened. This was no accident. I parked the car at the edge of the clearing and killed the engine. Silence pressed in around me. The light in the barn flickered again, and I caught a glimpse of a figure standing near the doorway, still watching. I unlocked the door but hesitated before stepping out. My phone buzzed again with another message, this time a single photo attached. I opened it. It was a picture of me, taken from behind as I sat in the driver's seat. The angle was low, as if someone had hidden nearby, watching me without my knowledge. I swallowed and looked toward the barn. The figure was gone. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam weak but better than nothing. I kept the door locked behind me and moved cautiously toward the barn. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, oil, maybe. As I approached, I heard the scrape of metal on concrete, soft but distinct. I stopped, heart in my throat. The barn door was cracked open just enough for me to slip inside. Inside, the light source was a small lantern on a table cluttered with papers, maps, and a laptop glowing faintly. There were surveillance photos posted on the wall, shots of me leaving the office, getting into my car, even the route I had taken so far, marked out in red. I felt like my skin had gone numb. The laptop pinged, drawing my attention. On the screen was a live feed from my car's interior camera. Someone had installed it without my knowledge, watching my every move in real time. I spun around, but the barn was empty. No sign of the figure who had been outside. The door was still slightly ajar, swinging gently in the cold night breeze. My phone buzzed again, this time a voice message. I hesitated, then pressed play. Stop. Turn back. This isn't somewhere you want to be. The voice was low, calm, but carried an unmistakable menace. I stood frozen, the flashlight beam trembling in my grip. The reality hit me like a punch. This wasn't just some random stalker or prankster. This was personal. Someone who knew me, who wanted to make sure I never reached my destination. I thought of the people I knew, the ones who might want to hurt me, or worse, prevent me from getting home. I struggled to remember any recent arguments, threats, or odd encounters. Nothing concrete. But it didn't matter. I was trapped in a place where the normal rules didn't apply. The roads I'd been sent down weren't just empty, they were carefully chosen to isolate me, to keep me alone and vulnerable. I backed out of the barn slowly, locking the door behind me. My eyes scanned the tree line, searching for movement, any sign of a break in the silence. The cold air felt sharper now, slicing through my jacket. I climbed back into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The GPS screen flickered back to life, the map more familiar now, showing a route that led back to the main highway. But the voice inside the car, the GPS, was dead silent. I didn't trust it. I stared at the road ahead, weighing my options. Drive toward the highway and hope to find help, or sit tight and wait for dawn, even as the feeling of being watched pressed down on me like a weight. I chose to drive. The wheels spun on gravel, then onto pavement. The black highway stretched ahead, empty and endless. But as I glanced in the mirror one last time, headlights appeared in the distance, closing in. I wasn't alone. Not by a long shot. Story 4, Unseen Pursuer, The Watcher That Vanishes. It started on Monday morning, the kind of morning where everything feels just a little heavier, like the world is dragging its feet through the fog. I shook it off, blaming tired eyes or the early morning shadows. Yet, every time I stepped outside after that, I caught that same fleeting glimpse. A dark figure just out of reach, barely there, always standing still, always watching. It was as if he was keeping pace with me, always a few steps behind or just out of my direct line of sight. The second time I saw him was 3 days later. I was walking to the subway, my mind caught up in the pre-work grind, when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the same figure leaning against a lamppost across the street. This time, I stopped dead in my tracks and stared. His face was obscured by the brim of the hat, and he didn't move, just stood watching as if waiting for me. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor from a nearby building, or someone waiting for the bus. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was deliberate. That he was waiting for me. Somewhere around that point, I started paying more attention. I scanned every street corner, every shadow, every figure on my usual routes. Every glimpse I caught of the stranger was brief, too brief to get a good look, but long enough to know it was the same person. The coat, the hat, the way he barely moved, like a statue set against the backdrop of the city. I began telling friends about it, half joking at first, expecting them to say I was imagining things. When I described the man, their reactions were lukewarm. Maybe you're just stressed, my friend Lisa suggested when we met for coffee. Or maybe it's someone you know but don't recognize. People can look really different from a distance. But I wasn't imagining it. I knew what I'd seen because my body reacted, heart racing, goosebumps crawling down my arms, that sinking pit of unease in my stomach. Lisa agreed to keep an eye out the next time I left my apartment, but when we stepped outside together the next day and I tried to point out the figure, there was nothing there. The next step was checking the security cameras. I figured if someone was deliberately following me or watching me, the building's cameras would have caught them. I emailed the apartment manager and requested footage from the days and times I'd seen the man near my building or on the street. I was polite, explaining I'd noticed something strange and wanted to make sure I was just being paranoid. The response came back after 2 days. No suspicious activity recorded. No one matching the description seen on any camera near the building. I was puzzled. I even tried going to the local convenience store and asking the clerk if he had seen anyone standing around the block or lingering near the intersection. The clerk looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Nope, nobody like that here. Just the usual crowd. I started keeping a small notebook, jotting down every time I thought I saw him, the date, time, location. I tried to catch him, to confront him even. Once, I crossed the street sharply and walked toward where I'd seen him, hoping to catch a better look. But by the time I got there, the spot was empty. No sign of anyone having been there. The city felt larger and lonelier with the knowledge that someone might be watching me, but denying it to everyone else. It's strange how you can feel so vulnerable in a place filled with millions of people. You can't shake the feeling that someone knows something you don't, or worse, that you're being observed without consent. The worst was the nights. No matter how many times I checked behind me, the darkened stairwell at the end of the hall, the elevator lobby, I never saw him there. It was only outside, in the public eyes, but somehow unseen. One evening, I told myself to face it head on. I left the apartment late and took a long walk through the quieter streets. I kept my phone ready, hoping to catch a glimpse, maybe even take a picture. I passed under street lamps, flickering neon signs, the occasional passing car. And then, out of the corner of my eye, there he was again. Just standing on the sidewalk a block ahead, motionless, hat low. I slowed down, heart pounding, and reached for my phone to snap a photo. I aimed the camera and pressed the button. A shutter click. But when I unlocked the screen to check, the image was blank, just a blur of pavement and streetlight, no figure there. I lowered the phone, stunned. Had I really seen him? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I looked up. Nothing. The street was empty. Each time I tried to talk about it, people gave me the same responses. No one was there. You must have imagined it, or worse, that's creepy. Maybe you should see someone. But I knew what I'd seen, and I wasn't going crazy. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? Someone is following me, but I have no proof, and every camera denies it. It sounded ridiculous when I said it aloud in my head. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone when I stepped outside my door persisted. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea of being watched and not being believed. It's a kind of isolation that digs under your skin and settles in your bones, leaving you constantly on edge. I started changing my routines, taking different routes, leaving at different times. But no matter what I did, I caught those fleeting glimpses. The man in the dark coat and hat was always there, just out of reach, always watching. And every time I asked for proof, for help, every camera, every witness, every record denied his existence. I went back to my apartment one night after a long, tense day and sat by the window, staring out at the street below. The city was alive with its usual noise, cars honking, people chatting, the distant wail of sirens. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was there somewhere, watching me even now. No matter how hard I searched, no matter how many times I asked, there was no sign of him, only the empty streets and my own restless thoughts. And that was the worst part, not knowing who he was, what he wanted, or why he was always just beyond the edges of my vision, slipping away whenever I tried to hold on. This was only the beginning. I woke up on Wednesday morning feeling a little more on edge than usual. I decided to take a different route to work. Instead of the usual dogleg through the park and past the corner deli, I walked straight down Maple Street, a path I rarely took because it added 10 minutes to my commute. I figured if this guy was really following me, maybe changing my routine would throw him off, or at least give me a better chance to catch him for good. At the corner of 12th and Maple, just past a row of closed storefronts, I saw him. The same figure, standing by the side of the building, partially hidden in shadow. His hat brim dipped low, his posture perfectly still. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to stop and look directly. "Hey!" I called out, voice catching somewhere between curiosity and fear. "Can I help you?" No response. I took a step forward. He didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't say a word. For a moment I thought maybe he vanished again, like last time, but no, he was still there. Just standing, watching. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. I scanned the street, the empty sidewalks, the closed shops. No sign of him. My chest tightened. Was I imagining things? Was this really happening, or was my brain playing tricks on me? Later that day, I decided to check the security footage from the building where I worked. The front desk was supposed to have cameras covering the sidewalk and street. If this man was really out there, surely he'd be caught on tape. I approached the security office and explained my concern to the guard, a guy named Marcus who had worked there for years and was known for being thorough. "Look, Marcus, this might sound crazy," I said, "but there's this guy I keep seeing outside. I think he's been following me or something. Could you check the footage from the last few days, especially on Maple Street?" Marcus gave me a skeptical look but nodded. "Sure, I can pull the tapes from the front camera. Let me see what I can find." We watched the recordings together, scrutinizing every passerby. There were plenty of people, delivery men, joggers, a couple of tourists, but no one who matched the figure I had seen. No hat pulled low, no stillness at the edge of the frame. Nothing. Marcus sighed. "Sorry, man. Nothing's jumping out at me." That was the first of many times I would hear that phrase over the next few days. I decided to ask my neighbors next. Maybe someone else had seen this guy too. I knocked on the door of the woman in 3B, an older lady named Mrs. Reynolds who often sat by her window with binoculars trained on the street below. "Mrs. Reynolds, sorry to bother you," I began, "but have you noticed anyone strange hanging around the building lately? A man, maybe? Someone watching?" She blinked at me, surprised. "Strange? No, dear, I don't think so. I keep an eye out, you know, but I haven't seen anyone unusual." I pressed, "Are you sure? Maybe someone standing still on the sidewalk, wearing a hat." "No, nothing like that. You know, people come and go all the time, but no one stays put like that." I left her apartment feeling a little more unsettled. If even the keen-eyed Mrs. Reynolds hadn't noticed, maybe I was truly alone in this. That afternoon, I tried to capture a photo or video with my phone the next time I saw him. I kept my camera app open as I left my building, hoping to catch a glimpse without looking too obvious. But every time the figure appeared, he was just out of frame or disappeared when I tried to focus. One evening, on my way home, I even stopped a young man walking his dog who was crossing the street near where I'd last seen the stranger. "Hey," I said, "did you see that guy standing by the lamppost back there? Tall, wearing a dark hat." He looked at me like I was nuts. "No, man. I've been walking this route for years, and I don't remember anyone like that." Later, I tried the same question with a barista in the coffee shop, a mail carrier, even a homeless man who often sat on the stoop near my apartment. None of them had seen anything unusual. It was as if the man only existed for me. The strangest part was that no camera, no witness, no record confirmed his presence. And yet, I was sure I wasn't hallucinating. There was something deliberate about the way he appeared and disappeared, as if he was playing a game I didn't understand. I started timing my sightings. Usually in the early morning or just before dusk. Always in the same general area, along my route. Always when I was alone. One evening, after work, I walked to the corner store to pick up a few things. I was scanning the street when I spotted him again, standing motionless by a street sign. This time, I was closer, about 20 feet away. I took a deep breath and called out, "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" No answer, just silence. Desperation pushed me forward. I started walking toward him, slow and steady. But just as I got too close to see his face, he melted into the crowd, swallowed by the tide of people heading home. I looked around wildly, trying to catch another glimpse, but he had vanished again. That night, I barely slept. The line between reality and paranoia was blurring. I kept replaying every encounter in my head, trying to find a pattern or a clue. Who was this man? Why was he following me? And how was it possible that not a single camera or person recognized him? I considered going to the police, but I worried what they might think. Someone accusing an invisible stalker, with no proof, might sound like a mental health crisis. I wanted to believe this was just a series of coincidences, or maybe my mind was playing tricks. But then I remembered the look in the man's eyes when I finally managed to see them for a split second. Cold, unreadable, and fixed on me. I wasn't imagining it. Something was very wrong. And I had to figure out what before it was too late. I spent the next few days trying to force the presence of that stranger into some kind of logic, but nothing fit. That Thursday afternoon, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of just turning my head quickly or glancing out of the corner of my eye, I stopped and stared directly where I thought I'd seen him. I was walking back from the grocery store near the corner of 56th and Pine when I caught the movement. There he was, standing near the entrance of a building across the street. The same dark coat, the same hat pulled low. I stepped off the curb and started crossing, keeping my eyes fixed on him. But when I reached the other side, the sidewalk was empty. No one had been standing there. I looked up and down the street, trying to catch any sign of him, but there was nothing. No shadow, no figure, no hat. Just the usual midday foot traffic. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone and tried to snap a photo of where he had been standing. The screen showed only a clear sidewalk and a few passing pedestrians. I flipped through the photos to see if maybe I caught him in the background, but no one matched the description. I even zoomed in and enhanced the images, but there was nothing unusual. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease as I crossed back to my side of the street. When I got home, I immediately checked the building's security cameras. It was a small office complex with 24-hour surveillance, and the footage was accessible online for tenants like me. I scanned through the last few days of video during the times I'd seen the stranger. Not a single frame showed anyone loitering outside that entrance. There were plenty of people walking by, but no one stood still for minutes on end, no one wore a hat pulled low over their face, no one matched the vague figure I'd seen. The camera angles were clear and steady. Nothing strange. The next day, I decided to ask around. I stopped a couple of people on the street, baristas, delivery workers, a couple of elderly folks sitting on a bench. I hesitated at first, worried I'd sound paranoid or ridiculous. But I still needed to know if anyone else had seen him. "Excuse me," I said to a woman wiping down the cafe windows near my apartment. "Have you noticed anyone hanging around here? Maybe wearing a coat and a hat, kind of watching people?" She looked at me like I'd sprouted an extra head. "No, not really. It's a busy neighborhood, lots of folks come and go. But nobody's been standing around like that, at least not for any length of time." I tried again further down the street with a delivery man loading packages on a cart. Same reaction, blank looks, confusion, no recollection of any suspicious figure. I even asked the doorman at my building, someone who saw every face that passed through the lobby. "No one like that around here," he said, shaking his head. "And if someone had been standing out there for long periods, I have noticed." By the afternoon, I felt like I was sinking. I sat on the edge of my bed, pressing my forehead against the window pane, trying to make sense of it all. Was I imagining things? Was my mind playing tricks on me? But the glimpses were so vivid, so real, I couldn't convince myself they were just hallucinations. Then, that evening, I made a decision to try something else. I downloaded a recording app and set it on the kitchen counter, pointing toward the apartment door. I planned to leave the door unlocked for a while the next day, so if the stranger was watching me, if he was intruding or even just lurking, I might catch something on audio. I didn't know why I thought it would help, but I needed evidence. Something more concrete than fleeting shadows and empty streets. The next morning, I left the apartment early, feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. I kept my phone ready, scanning the street as I walked, but again, no sign of him. And when I returned 6 hours later, the audio file was just a long, uneventful recording of my empty apartment with the faint hum of the refrigerator and distant city noises. I played it over and over, listening for anything out of place, footsteps, voices, breathing. Nothing. That night, unable to sleep, I finally told my best friend, Michael, over the phone about the whole thing. He was skeptical at first, which was understandable. "Maybe you're stressed," he said. "I know work's been crazy, but that doesn't mean someone's stalking you." "I don't think it's stress," I replied. "I see him everywhere. I can feel it." We made plans to meet up the next day, and I told him I'd try to catch the guy together if I saw him again. The following afternoon, Michael came over after work. We walked the usual routes together, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. For hours, nothing. No sign of the stranger. I was about to give up hope when, just as we were turning onto Maple Street, I caught a flicker out of the corner of my eye. There. The figure. "Wait," I said, grabbing Michael's arm. "There. Look." Michael turned quickly, but the street was empty. I felt my heart pounding as I scanned the sidewalk and windows. He was nowhere. "Are you sure?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, I saw him," I said. "Right there." We stood there for a moment, but no one appeared. "Maybe you imagined it again," Michael said quietly. "No," I insisted. He was real. Determined, I pulled out my phone and started recording a video. We waited silently, eyes peeled. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 10 minutes. Still nothing. Michael looked at me, his expression softening. "We'll figure this out," he said. "But you need to be careful." His words hit me harder than I expected. Careful. Because if he was watching me, maybe he wasn't just waiting. Maybe he was planning something. That night, I double-checked every lock on my doors and windows. I even bought a small door alarm, something to alert me if the door opened unexpectedly. As I lay in bed, I realized the stranger wasn't just an enigma anymore. He was a threat. And I had no idea what he wanted or how to stop him. The question was, how long until he made his move? The days after my last encounter felt like walking underwater, slow, muffled, distorted. By Thursday, I decided I needed to take a more systematic approach. If this was some kind of stalking, I had to document it. I started carrying my phone in my hand at all times, ready to snap photos or videos the moment I caught that fleeting glimpse. I also made a mental note to ask people directly, strangers, shopkeepers, anyone nearby if they'd seen someone matching the description. That morning, I left my apartment around 7:30. The sky was overcast, a dull gray that made the city seem colder than usual. I felt the familiar prickling sensation at the back of my neck when I stepped out onto the sidewalk, as if I was being watched even before I looked. I scanned the street carefully, nothing. No figure lurking in shadows, no strange man leaning against lampposts. Still, I kept my phone ready. As I walked down the block towards the corner deli, my eyes darted towards the side streets, the alleys, anywhere that man could hide. At the deli, the bell tinkled overhead as I stepped inside. I glanced around the small, cramped space, but all I saw were the usual early customers, office workers clutching coffee cups, the owner behind the counter counting cash. No strange man in a hat. Morning, I said to the owner, a wiry man named Luis who always had a joke or two ready. Hey, you again. The guy from down the hall, right? He said, nodding toward my apartment building as if he recognized me from the neighborhood. I hesitated, then blurted out, have you ever seen someone hanging around the neighborhood? A man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a dark jacket and a hat that covers his face. Luis frowned, wiping his hands on his apron. Can't say I have. You sure you're not just seeing things? It's a busy street, lots of people passing through. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. I left the deli feeling no better than when I'd arrived. No one else had seen him. No cameras seemed to catch him. It was like he existed only in my peripheral vision, just out of reach. Later that afternoon, I stopped at a small coffee shop near my office. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where regulars huddled over laptops or whispered into their phones. I sat near the window, sipping my latte and scanning the street outside. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. There he was, standing on the sidewalk across the street, just by the crosswalk. The same dark jacket, the hat low over his face. My heart leapt. I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture, but the moment the camera focused, the man turned and disappeared into a side street. I blinked, and he was gone. Still, I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't let him slip away that easily again. I dashed outside, crossing the street just as the traffic light changed. I looked around frantically, searching the faces of passers-by. I called out quietly, "Excuse me, did you just see a man in a hat? Around here?" A young woman walking her dog shook her head. "No, sorry. I haven't seen anyone." A man sitting on a bench glanced up, then back at his phone without answering. No one had seen him. No one acknowledged he was there. I knew I looked frantic, maybe even a little crazy, but I had to ask someone. I swallowed my pride and pulled the barista inside the coffee shop aside. "Hey, did you see someone just outside? A man, kind of watching?" I whispered. She frowned as if I'd asked something silly. "No one like that, sorry." I wanted to scream. Was I losing my mind? Or was this some kind of deliberate erasure? How could so many people deny seeing someone who had been there just seconds before? That evening, I returned home early, exhausted and frustrated. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the photos and videos on my phone. Nothing. Not a single image showed the man. Every picture was either blurred or empty. The next day, I made an effort to check the security cameras around my apartment building. There was a small camera perched above the main entrance, its red light blinking steadily. I asked the building manager, an older woman named Mrs. Carter, for access to the footage from the past few days. "Is there a problem?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. I hesitated but told her about the man I kept seeing. Mrs. Carter sighed and shook her head. "I've looked through the footage. No sign of anyone matching your description. Maybe you're imagining things." Her words hit me hard. No one else saw him, and no cameras recorded him. I felt both relieved and terrified. If no one else saw him, if the cameras didn't catch him, what was he doing? How was he moving through the city invisible? I spent the weekend trying to piece things together. I made notes of every time I saw the man, the location, time, what I was wearing, what I was doing. Patterns emerged. He always appeared when I was alone, usually in places with little foot traffic or where the light was dim. But he never approached, never made a sound. Just watched. I asked around at work, carefully, not wanting to seem paranoid. I showed pictures I'd found online of men who looked similar, hoping someone might recognize the face. No one did. On Monday morning, I decided to change my routine. Instead of taking my usual route to work, I walked a different way, avoiding the streets where I'd seen the man before. For once, I felt a flicker of hope that I might shake him. At the corner near the coffee shop, I paused and looked behind me. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening in relief. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow, deliberate, matching my pace. I turned quickly. No one there. I spun again, scanning the street, heart pounding. No one. Just the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I didn't wait to see if he'd appear again. I walked faster, my breath shallow, until I was safely inside my office building. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every noise in the apartment amplified: the creaking pipes, the distant siren, the soft tick of the clock. I felt watched. Not by a ghost or a demon, but by a man who moved through the city like a shadow, always present, yet never captured. A man who wanted me to see him, but no one else. And for the first time, I realized a terrifying truth. He wasn't invisible because of anything supernatural. He was invisible because everyone was hiding him. After days of restless nights and jittery mornings, I decided to change my routine. The morning was crisp, the city waking up in the familiar hum of engines and distant conversations. I sat near the front of the bus, eyes scanning the sidewalks as we crept forward. For a while, everything seemed normal. Just people rushing to work, dogs being walked, delivery trucks rumbling past. Then, as we rounded the corner at 7th and Maple, I saw him. He stood near the entrance of a coffee shop, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn jacket. His head was down, but the brim of the hat was unmistakable. I tensed, unsure if I should call attention to him or keep quiet. The bus stopped, and most passengers disembarked. I stayed seated, heart pounding, trying to catch a better look. But as if sensing my gaze, the figure straightened and turned abruptly, disappearing through a narrow alley beside the coffee shop. My impulse was to follow, but the bus pulled away before I could move. I leaned forward, peering into the alley, but by then he was gone. At work, I resolved to check the coffee shop's security footage. If he was there just outside, the cameras might have captured him. I approached the manager, a woman named Carla who had always been friendly. I explained my situation as vaguely as I could, careful not to sound paranoid. "Sorry," she said, frowning. "We don't keep footage long. It's overwritten after 72 hours. And even then, it's just the inside of the shop. The entrance doesn't have a camera pointed outside. That's dumb. No footage, no proof." Determined, I decided to widen my net. Over the next week, I began asking neighbors and shopkeepers if they had noticed anyone hanging around, someone unusual, perhaps. I described the hat, the dark jacket, the way the man stood motionless at the edges of my vision. Each person shook their head, some offering polite sympathy, others glancing at me as if I'd lost my mind. The barista at the corner cafe told me, "Nobody's been around like that. You're probably just stressed, you know? These things happen when you're tense." I tried not to let it get to me. Then the strangest thing happened. One afternoon, while walking home from the grocery store, I saw him again. This time, he was sitting on a bench in the park, a few yards behind a cluster of trees. When I stopped dead in my tracks, he flicked his head up and looked directly at me. The hat shadowed his face, but the intensity of his gaze made me shiver. I blinked. When I looked again, he had vanished. But this time, there were witnesses. Two women nearby, talking on a bench, had noticed. I approached them cautiously. Did you see that man over there? I asked, pointing to the spot where he had been. They exchanged a glance. There was nobody there, one of them said. Just us and some pigeons. I felt a flush of frustration. No, I swear, I insisted. He was right there, sitting on the bench. They both shook their heads, their expressions a mix of confusion and pity. I don't know what you're seeing, the other woman said softly. Maybe you're imagining things. I walked away, heart pounding, trying to keep my voice steady. I was beginning to question my own senses. Was I losing my grip on reality? That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, scanning the videos from the building's lobby camera again. The grainy footage showed residents coming and going, the usual ebb and flow. No sign of a man. I called the building's superintendent, an older man named Mr. Harris. Have you seen anyone lurking around? Someone who doesn't live here? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. To be honest, I haven't, he said finally. This building's pretty secure. We have cameras at every entrance, and I do rounds twice a day. If someone suspicious were around, I'd know. I thanked him, but the unease persisted. In a last-ditch effort, I downloaded an app to track local security cameras, traffic cams, public spaces, anything that might have captured the area near my apartment during my comings and goings. I scoured hours of footage, freezing frames, zooming in on every figure. Nothing. No sign of a man anywhere. That night, I lay in bed with the curtains drawn tight. Every sound outside made me jump at the distant siren, the shout from a passerby, the creak of the radiator. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but my gut told me otherwise. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was watching me. The question was why. The next morning, I noticed something new. A handwritten note slipped under my door. No return address, no signature. Just a single line scrawled in black ink, "Stop looking." My heart hammered. Who was playing this game? The stranger? Someone else entirely? I stuffed the note into my pocket and stepped outside. The city was already bustling. I walked briskly, eyes sharp, scanning every shadow, every face. And there he was again, standing near a fire hydrant, just beyond the edge of the crowd. Watching. Not moving. Waiting. My throat tightened. I clenched my fists. This wasn't a trick of the light or a product of stress. This was something else. Something deliberate. I pulled out my phone and called the police. When the officer arrived, I pointed toward the spot. "Do you see him?" I asked. The officer shook his head. "There's no one there," he said, glancing around. I felt the walls closing in. "Please," I said. "I can show you. I see him all the time. He's always just out of reach. I don't know who he is, but I'm scared." The officer nodded politely. "I understand," he said. "We'll keep an eye out." But as he walked away, I knew. No one else would see him. No one else would believe me. And this stranger, this watcher, had all the power. All I could do was keep looking and hope I didn't lose myself in the process. Story 5, Silent Warning, The Call Inside. I had never babysat alone before. The baby, Emma, was 6 months old and had been cranky all evening. Her parents had warned me she might fuss a bit before bedtime, which she did. I'd rocked her gently in the dim nursery, humming the lullabies her mom had told me. She finally dozed off around 8:30, wrapped snugly in her little pink blanket, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I carried her downstairs carefully and settled her crib in the corner of the living room. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint creaks of settling wood. I was just about to settle on the couch with my phone when the landline rang. I froze, my heart jumping for a split second. The house was old, and the line was still a fixed phone on the wall in the kitchen. My first thought was that the parents might have left it on, but I hadn't heard it ring earlier. I didn't want to be rude, but I wasn't expecting calls. I walked to the kitchen and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I said tentatively. There was silence on the other end. My grip tightened, and I was about to hang up when a faint, raspy voice spoke. "Check the baby." I blinked, confused. The voice sounded hoarse, like someone who had been whispering for hours. I looked around nervously. The house was too big for someone to be hiding in, I told myself. Maybe it was a prank call. I said, "Who is this?" but there was no answer. Before I could hang up, the line went dead. I stared at the receiver, unease crawling under my skin. The house was quiet again. I reminded myself it was probably some kid messing around. The parents had told me the line usually wasn't used much. I put the receiver back and tried to shake off the chill. 10 minutes passed. Emma was still sleeping soundly. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then the phone rang again. My heart hammered. I jogged back to the kitchen, picked up the receiver. "Hello?" "Check the baby," the voice whispered again. This time, it was closer, more urgent. I swallowed hard. "Who is this? What do you want?" No reply. The line clicked and went dead. I dropped the receiver, my hands trembling. I ran to the living room to check on Emma. The baby was sound asleep, peaceful, not even stirring. I tried the phone again. Nothing. No dial tone. I lifted the receiver and listened. Dead air. How was the call even coming through? I pulled out my phone and looked up the number that had appeared on the caller ID before it cut off. It was blocked. No way to trace it. I told myself to calm down. Maybe the line was glitching. Maybe someone was outside playing a trick. I tried to ignore it and went back to the couch. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. I leapt up so fast I almost dropped my phone. I forced myself back to the kitchen and answered quickly. "Check the baby." The voice was clearer now, almost breathing on the line. I dropped the receiver and scanned the kitchen quickly, seeing nothing but shadows from the dim light. My mind raced. Someone was in the house. They couldn't be, right? The front door had been locked when I arrived. The back door as well. I heard the parents say the alarm was set, but they'd left a code with me just in case. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, "Call me now." I needed someone to talk to, someone who could come. The phone rang again before I had a chance to sit down. I ignored it, but it kept ringing, the shrill noise making my stomach twist. I decided to check the doors and windows. Maybe a window was open. I walked cautiously through the hallway, peeking into the dark rooms. All the windows were shut. The doors were locked. I felt a presence, like someone was watching me. I returned to the living room and found Emma had shifted in her crib. I sat beside it and whispered, "It's okay, Emma, I'm right here." The phone rang again. By now, the panic was setting in fully. I answered with shaky breath. "Check the baby," the voice said, "urgent now." "Who are you?" I demanded. No answer. "Why are you doing this?" The line went dead. I realized the phone wasn't just a prank call anymore. Someone was in the house. The line was dead, but the calls came through somehow. I looked toward the hallway, toward the shadowed doorway to the basement. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Mom. What's wrong? Call me. I dialed her quickly, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom, someone's here. I think they're watching me. Her calm voice on the other end said, Are you safe? Have you locked the doors? Yes. But the phone keeps ringing and the line is dead. I heard a voice telling me to check the baby. Stay where you are. I'm calling your dad. If you can, get out of the house. I can't leave the baby. Stay calm. We're on our way. I hung up and looked back at Emma. The baby was still asleep. I didn't want to leave her, but I knew I had to do something. Then I noticed the curtains in the living room had shifted slightly, like someone had brushed against them. My breath caught. I crept toward the window, heart pounding. Outside, nothing but the dark, quiet street. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement behind the living room doorway. I spun around. No one. I backed up slowly. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. And then, footsteps upstairs. I moved toward the stairs, each step heavy with dread. Emma stirred. I called out softly, It's okay, baby. I'm here. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched. I gripped my phone, ready to call for help again. But the line was dead. I wasn't alone. And I didn't know who was watching. I stood frozen, the receiver pressed awkwardly against my ear. Hello? I said again, my voice cracking. Who is this? Only silence. Then the line went dead. I lowered the receiver slowly, my heart thumping hard against my ribs. My fingers trembled as I glanced at the phone's cord, tracing it carefully to the wall. The old rotary phone was connected directly to the wall plate. I knew this house well enough to understand that if this call had come through the landline, there should have been a dial tone before I picked it up. There wasn't one. I frowned, setting the receiver back on the cradle. Curious and uneasy, I stepped toward the living room, glancing at Emma again. She was still fast asleep, her tiny hands curled into fists. I checked her diaper bag nearby, dry and clean. Everything seemed normal. I shook my head to clear the unease creeping into my chest. I told myself it was probably some prank call, but it unsettled me deeply. Who could be calling that number? The parents hadn't given it out to anyone besides close family and friends. And the eerie timing right after Emma finally fell asleep felt deliberate. I tried to shake it off and return to the couch, wrapping my arms around myself. The house felt unnaturally still, the usual creaks and groans absent. For a moment, the silence pressed down so heavily I thought I might suffocate. Then the phone rang again. I jumped. The shrill ring shattered the quiet, sharp and insistent. I scrambled to the kitchen and grabbed the receiver. Hello? My voice was tighter this time, bracing for whatever came next. Again, silence. My heart hammered. Check the baby, the same whisper came through, chilling and urgent. I swallowed hard. Who is this? Please stop calling, I demanded. No reply. The line went dead again. I didn't move for a moment, my mind racing. I picked up the receiver once more, listening carefully. There was no dial tone now, just the faintest static, almost like a crackle. Slowly, a horrible possibility dawned on me. I felt my pulse spike. I pulled on the receiver, following the cord along the wall, peering behind the kitchen cabinet in case the wiring was loose or tampered with. Nothing. The phone line appeared intact. I pulled open the back panel of the phone itself, exposing the wires and connections. Everything looked as it should. No signs of tampering. I backed away, heart still pounding, and called out softly, "Emma?" The baby made a small, sleepy whimper but didn't stir. I sat back on the couch, eyes darting around the room. The house felt like a trap, too quiet, too still. The phone rang again almost immediately. I yelped and grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" The same voice whispered again, "Check the baby." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm watching her. She's fine." No response. The line went dead. I felt tears prick my eyes, frustration and fear swirling inside me. I was alone, babysitting a tiny child, and someone was watching us, someone who knew the layout well enough to call from inside the house, from a line that shouldn't technically be working. I stood and carefully moved back toward the living room. My eyes scanned every shadow, every corner. The windows were all locked and covered with curtains. The front and back doors were bolted. I checked the baby monitor. Static. It had been working earlier, but now the screen flickered, the audio crackled. My stomach twisted. Someone was definitely inside. I couldn't let panic take over. I needed a plan. I grabbed Emma carefully, holding her close. The warmth of her tiny body against mine was some comfort, but it wasn't enough to soothe the cold dread in my veins. I moved slowly toward the front door, trying not to make noise. I planned to check the locks again, maybe call the parents or 911 if I could get a signal. But the phone rang again before I reached the doorway. I froze, clutching Emma tighter. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to pick up. "Check the baby." The voice was closer this time, harsher, more insistent. I spun around, eyes wide, searching the shadows. The hallway was empty. The kitchen too. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse, a quick shadow crossing behind the stairwell. My heart slammed against my chest. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice trembling. No answer. I took slow steps toward the stairs, Emma pressed against my chest, my free hand holding the phone like a lifeline. The stairs creaked softly under my weight. At the top, the hallway stretched empty and silent. The door to the nursery stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open cautiously. Emma's crib was empty. My heart dropped. I spun around, panic clawing at my throat. I called out her name, voice shaking. "Emma." I heard a soft rustle from the master bedroom across the hall. I hurried toward it, opening the door to find Emma lying asleep on the bed, swaddled and safe. I let out a shaky breath and picked her up. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was quickly replaced by cold fear. How had she gotten out of the crib? Had someone moved her? I looked around the room, eyes scanning for signs of an intruder. Nothing. I sat on the bed, holding Emma close. The phone in my hand rang again. I stared at it, frozen. The line was still dead, no dial tone, just ringing. I answered, voice barely a whisper. "Check the baby." The voice was right there, inside the house. I clenched my jaw, gripping Emma tightly. I needed help, and fast. I pulled out my cell phone, hand shaking, and tried to call 911. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. I looked up, heart racing. The bedroom window was slightly open, a thin breeze fluttering the curtains. Someone had been inside. Someone was watching me. And they weren't going to stop. I hugged Emma close and backed toward the door. I was trapped in a house with a stranger, and the nightmare was just beginning. My fingers trembled as I lowered the receiver. The kitchen suddenly felt colder, though the thermostat said otherwise. I glanced toward the living room, where Emma's crib sat in the corner, bathed in the dim glow of the night light. Her chest rose and fell gently, her little hands twitching in sleep. I swallowed hard and walked back to the phone, half expecting it to ring again, but it remained silent. I forced myself to breathe normally. Maybe it was a prank call. Maybe someone had dialed the wrong number. Still, the voice, hoarse, urgent, had sounded so close, so deliberate. I tried to dismiss the chill creeping down my spine and took another step toward the baby. Then the phone rang again. My heart hammered. I stared at it as if willing it not to ring. But it did. I didn't move at first. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to pick up. "Check the baby," the voice whispered. The same rasp, the same chilling insistence. That voice was close, almost breathing into the receiver. "Who is this? What do you want?" I demanded, voice shaking. Silence. Then the line went dead. I gripped the phone tighter, suddenly aware that it was the landline that had rung. I owned a cell phone, but I hadn't heard it ring. This old house had only one landline, and it was in the kitchen. How could the call come through if the line was dead? I glanced at the phone's cord, expecting to see it disconnected or frayed, but it looked intact. My mind raced. I had to be calm. I had to figure this out. I left the kitchen and moved toward the living room again, checking on Emma. She was still sleeping, peaceful and unaware. I tried to relax, telling myself maybe it was nothing. Then the phone rang again. This time, I didn't pick it up. My gaze flicked around the kitchen nervously. Was someone outside? Was it a prank? I went to the window but saw only the quiet street drenched in soft street light. I swallowed the lump in my throat and sat down at the kitchen table, phone in hand. I ran through the numbers in my mind, trying to remember if the parents had given me any emergency contacts besides their cell phones. I pulled out my own phone and tried to call the house number, just to see if the line was even active. The call went through, a ringing tone sounded, then a voicemail message. So the line worked. But then why had the calls come in from the landline? It made no sense. I was about to stand up when the phone rang again. I jumped, clutching the receiver as if it might bite me. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice this time was quieter, but the urgency didn't let up. "Check the baby." I gritted my teeth. "I'm here." "She's fine." No response. I hung up and looked at the phone, heart racing. I realized my cell was dead inside the house. I tried to call earlier, but the signal was weak. The parents had mentioned that before, weak reception in this old neighborhood. My cell was useless here. I looked toward the living room. My eyes caught a flicker of movement near the front door. I squinted, but it was just a shadow cast by the swaying branches outside. I tried to calm myself. I decided to check the baby once more, just to be sure. I walked slowly toward the crib, every step echoing in my ears. Emma was still asleep. No sign of distress. Her chest rose and fell evenly. I reached out and touched her forehead. It was warm and steady. Relief flooded through me, but the pit in my stomach remained. I turned and headed back to the kitchen when the phone rang again. No hesitation this time, I didn't answer. Instead, I crossed to the living room window, peering out into the night. The street was empty. No cars, no people. I was about to take a breath and sit down when I noticed something near the staircase. A figure. Half hidden by shadows, they stood just inside the house, barely moving. My heart stopped. I blinked. They didn't move. I rubbed my eyes. Still there. I yanked open the front door. No one. The porch light outside flickered, but no footsteps or leaves rustled. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The figure was gone. I stood frozen, every muscle tensed, listening for any sound. The house suddenly felt claustrophobic, oppressive. I went back to the phone, which began to ring again. If I had to face whoever this was, I needed to be prepared. I grabbed the kitchen knife from the block. The phone rang a fourth time. I didn't answer. Instead, I dialed 911 on my cell. No signal. I tried the house phone. No dial tone. The line was dead. Panic surged through me. The calls had come from inside the house. I dropped the knife and bolted for the front door. Locked. I tried the windows. Locked. I realized the parents must have locked up tight before leaving. And someone had been inside all along. My eyes darted back to the living room, scanning the shadows. The phone rang again. I didn't pick up. The baby stirred. I moved quickly toward her crib. "Emma," I whispered, scooping her up. Her little body was warm and steady. I held her close, heart pounding. I tried to listen for any noise beyond the quiet house. Then, from the corner of the room, I spotted movement, a shadow slipping behind the heavy curtains. I froze. No time to think. I backed toward the kitchen, holding Emma close. The phone rang once more. This time, I ignored it. I needed to escape. I grabbed my keys from the counter. Locked doors, no help from the phone lines, no signal on my cell. I pulled open the back door. It was unlocked. I didn't hesitate. I ran out into the night, holding Emma tight. Behind me, the house stood silent, dark, and empty again. I didn't look back. Not until the police arrived. And even then, I wasn't sure who had been watching me or why. But I knew one thing, it wasn't just a prank. Someone had been inside the house all along. Watching. Waiting. I dropped the receiver and took a step back, heart pounding so hard it was nearly impossible to think straight. The first call had rattled me, but the second call came faster than I expected. The phone rang again, piercing through the quiet house like a warning bell. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as they reached for the receiver. I forced myself to answer. "Hello?" "Check the baby," the voice whispered again, low and urgent, like a warning carried on a breath. This time, I could hear the faint shifting of static, and I swore I heard a faint shuffling sound behind the voice. I didn't respond because I couldn't, not yet. After a second, the line went dead, and I was left holding the silent phone, the dial tone buzzing emptily. It didn't make sense. The parents had told me the landline was disconnected except for emergencies, and the cordless had no signal in this old house. I stood there, trying to steady my breath, before deciding to check on Emma. The living room was dark except for the faint amber glow of the nightlight near the crib. I moved toward her slowly, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. Her chest rose and fell evenly, just as it had before. "Nothing's wrong," I whispered, more to convince myself than anyone else. I turned back toward the kitchen, but that's when it clicked, the landline was a dead line. It shouldn't have been ringing at all. I grabbed my phone and checked the call log. Nothing. No incoming calls, no messages, no missed numbers. I tried calling the number back, but the line was dead. I felt my skin crawl. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think it through. Who could make a call from a deadline? And why would someone urge me to check the baby if everything seemed fine? The phone rang again, sharp and sudden. My heart leapt, and I almost dropped the receiver again. Hands shaking, I answered. Hello? Check the baby, the voice said, only this time it was different, clearer, closer. There was no static, but a faint breathing echoed on the line, uneven and ragged, like someone was holding their breath. I swallowed hard and forced myself to say, "Who is this? What do you want?" "Check the baby," the voice repeated, and then the line went dead again. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I needed to get away from the phone, from the voice, from the feeling that someone was watching me. My eyes darted around the room, then settled on the front door. I took a step toward it, but the creak of the old wood was louder than I expected in the silent house. I froze. That's when I noticed it. A shadow moved in the corner of the living room, just at the edge of the hallway that led to the back of the house. It was quick, barely more than a flicker, but it was enough. My heart hammered in my chest, and I spun toward the sound. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No response, but I caught the faintest sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway, slow and deliberate. Panic climbed up my throat, but I forced myself not to scream. I crept toward the baby's crib, eyes wide and searching. Emma was still there, asleep, wrapped in her pink blanket, peaceful and unaware. But whoever was in the house wasn't here for comfort. I glanced toward the hallway leading to the back rooms. The door to the study was shut tight, but I knew the back door, through the mudroom, was unlocked. The parents had told me to lock all doors and windows before they left, but I couldn't be certain they had. My phone was in my pocket, battery low but still usable. I dialed 911, whispering the address and explaining the situation. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and to stay put. I nodded, though the operator couldn't see me. I rushed back to the living room, eyes darting between the hallway and the baby. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the low ticking of the wall clock and Emma's soft breathing. That's when I heard the phone ring again, this time from the baby's room. My blood turned to ice. I crept quietly to the nursery door, heart in my throat. The baby monitor lay on the shelf, screen dark and dead. The nursery's landline phone, there wasn't one. The only phone was in the kitchen. I opened the door slowly and saw the phone, no, the baby's toy phone lying on the floor, disconnected from anything. The ringing came from somewhere else. I backed away, panic tightening its grip. There was only one explanation. Someone was inside the house, moving from room to room, calling me from somewhere near the baby. I raced back to the living room, grabbing a lamp from the side table. I fumbled with the switch so hard my fingers slipped a few times before the bulb glowed. I swung the light toward the hallway and the study door. The study door creaked open, a dark figure slipping out with a quick glance toward the crib. "Stop!" I shouted, voice sharp and loud. The figure froze, then bolted down the hallway toward the back door. I chased after them, heart thumping so hard I felt like I could hear it in my ears. But before I could reach the door, it slammed shut. I lunged at the handle, trying to turn it, then yanked hard, but it wouldn't budge. I looked down and saw the chain lock was fastened from the outside. That's when I realized the intruder had been inside the house the whole time, watching me, waiting. The calls, the warnings, they weren't warnings at all. They were a cruel game meant to keep me off balance. I dialed 911 again, voice trembling. "They're still here. They locked me in. Please hurry." I sank against the wall, clutching the lamp, my eyes never leaving the hallway. Emma was safe in her crib, but I wasn't sure for how long. Minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. And then, the sound of sirens outside shattered the silence. The front door burst open, and 2 officers rushed in. I barely remember explaining everything: the calls, the shadow, the locked back door. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no one. I stayed with Emma, watching her sleep, tears streaming down my face. Later, the police told me someone had been living in the crawl space beneath the house, an intruder who had been hiding there for weeks. The calls had come from a hidden phone line they'd set up, a twisted way to toy with me. I never babysat alone again. And though the house looked peaceful, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Because someone had been inside. Watching. Waiting. After that first call, the house felt different, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I glanced at the phone again. The line was dead, the kind of empty silence you hear when the receiver is lifted but no dial tone comes through. I knew the parents hadn't mentioned any issues with the phone line. More than that, the house was old but well cared for, the phone wiring should have been straightforward, and the system hadn't given any trouble so far. Still, the calls kept coming, one after another, always the same chilling message: check the baby. Every time I lifted the receiver, it was just static, sometimes faint breathing or nothing at all. But the fear it seeded was like a slow poison. I tried to stay calm, reasoning with myself. Maybe it was a prank, a cruel joke someone from school or work had cooked up, knowing I was babysitting alone for the first time. But who even knew? The parents hadn't told anyone about me watching Emma tonight. And why would someone want to mess with a random girl babysitting a baby? It didn't make sense. I walked back to the living room, phone pressed against my palm. I crossed to the window that looked out onto the street, pulling back the curtain just a little. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional car passed in the distance, lights dim in the dark. Nothing suspicious out there. My eyes went back inside, scanning every shadow, every corner. The house seemed normal, but every noise felt amplified: creaks in the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the distant ticking of a clock on the wall. Emma's soft breathing was the only comforting sound. Then I noticed it: the baby's monitor was off. I was sure I'd turned it on when I put Emma down. I moved quickly to the side table and flicked it back on. The screen was black, dead. I pressed the power button again and again. Nothing. Great, I muttered under my breath. The monitor was old, but it always worked before. I tried changing the batteries from the drawer, but the replacements were dead too. Maybe the parents had forgotten to replace them. No way I was going to leave Emma unattended in a dead silence. I pulled the rocker chair closer to the crib, settling into it with a tight grip on the baby's blanket. I hummed softly, trying to ignore the buzzing in my ears, waiting for the next call. When the phone rang again, my heart jumped. I grabbed the receiver but paused before answering. "Who's there?" I whispered into the mouthpiece. Silence. Then, the voice came, clearer this time. "Check the baby." I swallowed hard. "Why? What did you see?" No answer. I dropped the receiver slowly, my hands trembling. I realized then that the calls weren't just warnings. They were distractions, designed to keep me off balance. Someone wanted me looking at the phone, not at the house. I tried to steady my breath and look around again. That's when I noticed the back door was slightly ajar. I was certain I'd closed it when I got here. The parents' instructions were clear: lock every door and window before bedtime. My pulse hit the ceiling. I stood up quickly, eyes darting to the door. The chain lock was still in place, but the deadbolt was undone. Someone had come in. I scanned the room, my mind racing. Where was Emma? She was still in her crib, sleeping, but now I felt exposed, vulnerable. The house no longer felt like a safe space. I picked up the phone again, half expecting the voice to return. "Check the baby," it said. My hands shook as I brought the receiver to my ear. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, voice barely steady. The line went dead. I slammed the receiver down and moved to the nursery, grabbing Emma carefully. Her eyes fluttered open, startled by the sudden movement. I held her close, whispering soothing words. She was safe, at least for now. I backed away from the door, watching every shadow, every crack. And then I saw it, a reflection in the hallway mirror, a figure standing just at the edge of the living room, partly hidden by the doorway. I blinked, and it vanished. My heart pounded as I realized someone was inside the house, someone who'd been watching me the whole time through the nursery window or the cracks in the walls. I didn't know who or why, but they wanted me terrified, alone, distracted. I clutched Emma tighter. I had to get out, had to call for help, but the phone was dead. The line was dead inside the house. I wasn't alone, and I had no way to call out. I moved silently toward the front door, glancing over my shoulder. The figure might still be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to lower my guard. I reached the door, fingers trembling as I tried the knob. It was locked from the inside. I jiggled the chain lock and the deadbolt, but they wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. The intruder was inside, and I was trapped. I backed into the living room, Emma pressed tightly against my chest. I needed to think, to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I looked around for anything I could use, a lamp, a chair, anything to defend myself. The phone rang again. I froze. Emma started to fuss, wailing softly in my arms. I answered the phone, voice cracking. "What do you want?" "Please, just leave." The line was silent. Then the voice whispered, almost softly this time, "You shouldn't have called me." The line went dead. I dropped the receiver and looked around, heart pounding. The house was silent except for Emma's soft cries. I realized this wasn't about the baby at all. It was about me. And whoever was here wanted to make sure I never left alive. Story 6, Mirror Replacement, The Doppelganger's Takeover. The first time I saw him, I thought I was looking in a cracked mirror. He stepped out, dressed in the same gray suit I had worn yesterday, with the same navy blue tie I always preferred, and the same subtle silver watch on his wrist. His hair was combed back just like mine, and his clean-shaven face wore that same slightly distracted expression I reserved for early mornings. I blinked and stared. There was no mistaking it. It was me. But there was a difference. He moved with the conviction I usually had after my second cup of coffee. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to my desk, sat in my chair, and smiled. "Good morning," he said. It was my voice. My exact tone, my habitual inflection, everything. "Who are you?" I asked, voice hoarse from disbelief. He smiled wider. "You can call me David." My name. I stood up, heart pounding. "What are you doing here? And how do you know my name?" He shrugged, as if these were simple questions. "I'm here to take care of your work. Your clients expect results, and I'm delivering." I couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. I glanced around. My coworkers were murmuring, glancing at me with wary eyes, then back at him. Nobody approached or said a word. The receptionist barely looked up. "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" I asked, voice trembling. He leaned closer. "Because I'm you. At least, that's what they believe." I shook my head sharply, trying to shake off the growing panic. "No, you're not. I'm David." He studied me like I was a curious animal. But you're the one who's out of place here. You're the one nobody else sees. That hit me like a punch. I looked around again at the coworkers who were avoiding my gaze, the clients who'd been scheduled to meet me but now apparently didn't exist in their calendars. Was he right? Had I somehow become invisible to everyone else's reality? I pulled out my phone, hoping to text my sister. The message sent, but the reply never came. I called my wife's number. Went straight to voicemail. My mind raced. Was this some elaborate prank? Had I been drugged or hypnotized? None of it made sense. He stood and brushed off his suit. Look, David, I don't have all day. People expect me to close deals, to keep the projects on track. You, on the other hand, seem to be misplaced. Where have you been? I demanded. Who are you? How did you get my memories? He smiled again, but it was colder this time. I didn't get them. I've lived them. I've been you for weeks. You've been elsewhere. Elsewhere? What does that mean? He looked at me as if I were a child who hadn't yet learned about the world's darker corners. It means you're a ghost now. Out of sync. People don't see you, don't remember you. I'm the real David. I felt like I was sinking into an abyss. This can't be happening, I whispered. Believe it or not, I have a life here. A wife who calls me by your name. Friends who share memories with me. Meetings I attend on your behalf. Meanwhile, you appear to them as a stranger. I shook my head again. You're lying. No, he said quietly. I'm not. I felt a wild urge to run out, to find someone who would believe me. But where could I go? My own office felt like a prison. My phone was useless. Even the photos on my desk had been replaced with pictures of him and my wife, smiling as if we'd all been happy this way for months. I sat back down, exhausted and defeated. What do you want from me? He hesitated. I want to keep the life I've built. And you, well, you need to figure out how to get it back. I swallowed. How? He stood, walking toward the door. That's up to you. But remember, I'm doing what you always wished you could do. I'm the version of you that succeeded. And then he left, the elevator doors closing behind him with a soft ding. I sat there, alone with my thoughts, wondering if I was losing my mind or if I had just lost everything that mattered. The room felt colder now, the silence pressing in like a weight. I stared at the spot where the elevator doors had sealed shut, my mind racing through every choice I ever made, every moment I could have turned a different way. Was this really me? Or some twisted mirror reflecting what I could have been, successful, confident, untouchable? A hollow ache settled in my chest. If he was right, if this version of me was the one who'd won, then what did that say about the life I'd lived? The mistakes I'd made? The people I'd hurt or lost? I'd always convinced myself that success wasn't everything, that happiness came in small, messy pieces, not the clean victories he represented. But now, alone in this quiet aftermath, I wasn't so sure. I rubbed my temples, trying to silence the chaos inside. If I was going to get my life back, I needed a plan, something concrete. But where to start when every step forward felt like sinking further into a shadow I barely recognized? Maybe the first thing was to stop seeing him as the enemy, and start seeing him as a warning, a version of myself that I could learn from or fight against. With a deep breath, I stood up, the room suddenly feeling less suffocating. Losing everything might be the worst thing that ever happened to me, or it might be the beginning of something I never dared to imagine. Either way, I couldn't stay frozen here. Not anymore. The office felt impossibly cold the rest of that morning, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I glanced up. My coworkers were back at their desks, eyes flickering toward me, but their gazes never lingered. It was as if I'd interrupted something. They looked through me rather than at me, like I was a ghost in their reality. My phone buzzed, a text from my manager, Mark. I swallowed hard and opened it. "Great job this morning, David. Keep up the momentum." I reread the message, bitter realization settling in. They didn't just accept him, they had already erased me. I tried to shake it off and focus on work, but everything felt alien. My computer screen displayed emails I didn't remember sending. Files I hadn't created were open on my desktop. Whoever this imposter was, he'd stepped way ahead of me. I felt like a stranger in my own life. By noon, I forced myself to stand and head to the break room, hoping to find some familiar face to anchor me. The room was lively with chatter, but every conversation stopped abruptly when I entered. People glanced at me with something like confusion or suspicion. It wasn't hostility, exactly, but an uneasy acknowledgement that I did not belong. I spotted Lisa from accounting across the room. For a moment I thought she'd recognize me, but when our eyes met, she blinked rapidly and made a polite excuse to leave. No one wanted to talk. I was about to leave when a voice stopped me. "Hey!" It was Tom, a junior analyst I'd mentored a few months ago. He looked hesitant, but also a little concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "I'm not sure." He nodded, glancing around nervously. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, but something feels off. You're not acting like yourself, and the David I saw this morning, it was like looking at the real you but better. More confident, like he owns the place." I bit my lip. "Because he does." Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how, but he's been living my life. And I'm the one who's disappeared." Tom ran a hand over his hair, uneasy. "This sounds crazy, but if there's anything I can do..." Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the room. "David, there you are." It was Mark, the manager. He came striding over, eyes sharp and assessing. Tom stiffened and muttered, "Better go." Mark stopped in front of me, smiled tightly, and said, "I've been looking for you. We need to discuss the Henderson account." I blinked. "I'm still here, Mark." His smile didn't waver. "Of course." "David, I mean..." I forced a weak laugh. "Right." He gestured toward the conference room. "Let's not keep the client waiting." I hesitated, then followed him. My heart pounded in my ears. I needed answers, and this was the closest chance I'd get. Inside the small conference room, Mark closed the door and leaned against the table, studying me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, voice low. I sighed. "Mark, who is that guy?" "The one who showed up this morning." He blinked, as if considering whether to respond. Then, carefully, "I think you mean David." "That's my name." Mark shook his head slowly. "No, you're not David. At least, not anymore." I stared at him, baffled. "What are you saying?" He looked away for a moment, then back. "There's been a change. Corporate decided to replace David." A cold wave of panic washed over me. "Replace me? With who?" Mark hesitated. "With someone who can do the job better. You've been underperforming. The new David is more efficient, more reliable." I felt the room spin. "You're firing me?" He sighed. "Not exactly. It's more like you're being phased out." Phased out? I echoed, my voice trembling. What does that mean for me? Mark's eyes softened. HR will be in touch. For now, just let the new David handle things. I shook my head. No. You don't understand. That man, he's me. Or he was. I'm still here. Mark's expression grew guarded. I won't pretend to understand what this means to you. But from the company's perspective, you're no longer the person in this role. I clenched my fists. So, you let him take my place. You erase me. Just like that. Mark shrugged. Business is business. The finality of those words hit me harder than any blow. I felt like I was drowning in a nightmare that would not end. After Mark left, I sat alone in the conference room, the silence pressing down on me. I had to figure out what was going on, and fast. Whoever this imposter was, he had access to all my contacts, my work, even my personal life. I was a ghost, fading from existence while he stepped into my skin. I pulled out my phone, hoping for a lifeline. My contacts list was intact, but every name held a question. Did they remember me? Did they even know who I was anymore? I dialed my wife's number, hands shaking. It rang once, twice. She answered. David? Her voice was warm, familiar. A lifeline. I closed my eyes. It's me, I said. Please, listen. Something's wrong. There was a pause. Then, cold and strange, she said, Who is this? I froze. Lisa, it's me. Your husband. Another pause. Her voice grew firm. You're mistaken. David left me months ago. I dropped the phone, heart shattering. The illusion shattered. I wasn't just erased from work, I'd been wiped from everyone's reality. That night, I sat in my apartment, the only place left that still felt like mine. But even here, the shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I was trapped in a life that no longer recognized me. Tomorrow, I would confront him. The man who lived my life, who wore my face and spoke my words, but was not me. And I had to find out why. Because if I didn't, I would disappear completely. I sat frozen behind my desk, the dull hum of the office filling the uneasy silence that had settled over the room. Look, he said smoothly, no one's going to believe you if you just start yelling about some imposter. You need to calm down. We can talk this through. His voice, my voice, was calm, calculated, but with an edge I didn't recognize in myself. I wanted to scream that I wasn't him, but every time I opened my mouth, the words felt swallowed by the room's oppressive quiet. The other employees were watching, their eyes flickering between the two of us, confusion and wariness etched on their faces. One of them, Jenna from accounting, finally broke the silence. David, we were really counting on you to close the Anders deal today. Have you got the updated figures ready? I blinked. The Anders deal? That was my project. The one I had been working on for weeks. I started, but the other David cut me off. I've been prepared, he said, smiling like a practiced actor. Everything's ready to go. He glanced at me, his eyes sharp and unreadable. I suggest you take a break. You look a little out of sorts. Out of sorts? I was out of my own life. The room seemed to close in around me, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to reach out to someone, anyone, but the faces around me were blank. No recognition. No camaraderie. Just strangers watching a man pretend to be me. I stood abruptly, knocking over my chair. Who are you? I demanded again, more forcefully. He shrugged, a shrug that carried the weight of finality. I told you. I'm David. We share the same name, same history, same memories. At least, the ones that matter. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You don't have my memories. You don't know what it's like to live my life. He leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. Actually, I do. I've been living it for a while now. You're the one who's been, well, erased. Erased. The word reverberated in my mind. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a fact. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What do you mean erased? From everyone? He nodded. It's complicated. But you have to understand, the world only has room for one of us. And the one who fits the role better wins. The one who fits better. I echoed, confusion and disbelief tangling inside me. How is that even possible? He smiled thinly. I'm not sure how it happened, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I'm here now. And you, well, you're the one who doesn't exist anymore. I staggered back against my desk, searching for something solid to hold on to, but all I found was the cold edge of my own shattered reality. I looked at the man in my suit, my face, and realized with a chilling certainty that my life had slipped through my fingers. Why? I whispered. Why would you do this to me? He shrugged again. Let's just say I'm better at it. Better at what you do, better at living the life you built. People want certainty, not doubt. They want someone who knows what they're doing. I'm that someone. His words cut deep. I had spent years carving out this existence, struggling through the monotony and the challenges, only to be replaced by someone who slipped in like a shadow and took over without a second thought. Can't you just leave me alone? I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. I want my life back. He considered me for a moment, then stood, smoothing his jacket. I'm sorry. This is bigger than you or me. There are people who made decisions. They want stability, consistency. You were unpredictable. Unpredictable. That was the accusation. I clenched my fists, rage and helplessness warring inside me. Who are you working for? He hesitated, then smiled with the same calm certainty. Let's just say I have backing from people who want things done right. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't a random act of psychosis or mistaken identity. This was a calculated takeover, a corporate coup where I had been quietly erased and replaced. I wasn't sure if I was more scared of what he was or what he represented. The sound of footsteps approaching interrupted the moment. My manager, Taryn, appeared at the edge of the room, clipboard in hand. She looked between the two of us, confusion knitting her brow. David, she said, looking at my doppelganger, the board meeting is in 20 minutes. They're expecting your presentation. He nodded smoothly. Of course. I'm ready. Taryn glanced at me, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might recognize me, might say something. But then her expression hardened into polite detachment. I assumed you'll be joining us later, she said, nodding at me. I started. But Taryn had already turned away. I realized then that no one was going to help me. I was alone. Invisible. A ghost in my own life. I sank back into my chair, the weight of the moment crushing me. My doppelganger stood by the window, looking out over the city with that same confident air I used to have. I wanted to scream, to fight, to reclaim my life, but the truth was clear, he had already won. And I was running out of time. I grabbed my phone from the desk. The screen lit up with a single notification, a text from my wife, Emily. Dinner at 7? Kids miss you. I stared at the message, heart pounding. I had no proof she still remembered me, no way to confirm if she even knew I existed anymore. I dialed her number, hands trembling. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, voice cracking. Emily, it's me. Please call me back. Something's wrong. I'm still here. After I hung up, I sat in silence. The office around me hummed with the mundane noise of people going about their day, oblivious to the fracture ripping through my life. I realized I had to act fast before the world completely forgot I ever existed. Because if I didn't, I might never come back at all. I remember the moment it hit me like a cold slap, sudden and unforgiving. I don't know why David even bothers showing up, one said. He's always missing in action. It's all Mark these days. Mark. Not me. Somehow, in their eyes, my doppelganger had become the real me. I wanted to interrupt, to shout, to explain. But their words felt like a wall that I couldn't break through. The office, the people I thought I knew, were slipping away, erased from their memories as though I had never existed. I was becoming a ghost in my own life. I left the break room, my hands trembling as I clutched my coffee cup. When I sat back at my desk, I found the chair was already pushed back, the computer logged in, and a small stack of papers neatly arranged, items I had never touched. This was where my double had been working all morning. The same morning I had spent wandering the corridors, trying to prove I was real. I glanced at my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. I tried calling my closest friend, Sarah. The call went straight to voicemail. A pit formed in my stomach. I decided to confront him directly. Calmly, I walked back to my office. There he was, seated at my desk, fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced ease. He looked up, that same unsettling smile on his face. Hey, he said, voice casual. You look like you've seen a ghost. I am a ghost, I said, my voice low, barely more than a breath. He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Come on, David. You're the one who disappeared on everyone. They've moved on. I clenched my fists. What do you mean, disappeared? I'm right here. No, you're not. You don't exist anymore. Not to them. He tapped his fingers on the desk. You've been erased like a bad computer file. I'm the one who's alive, active. I stared at him, a knot tightening in my throat. Who are you? And why are you doing this? His smile faded. You really want to know? Because this is what you don't get. You've been a liability. Forgetful, distracted. You missed deadlines, lost clients. I'm the upgrade. I'm the version that works. I shook my head in disbelief. This is insane. You can't just replace me. Watch me. I had to understand how deep this went. He knew my clients, my routines, even my personal quirks, the way I tapped my pen when nervous, the names of my favorite local coffee shops. It was terrifying how flawlessly he mimicked me. I tried calling my manager, hoping to get someone on my side. The number went unanswered. I texted, but there was no reply. I even stopped by the office after hours, hoping to catch someone who remembered me, but the building was eerily silent. I was becoming unmoored, not just from my job, but from reality itself. That night, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through my social media feeds. No new notifications. No birthday wishes, no invites, no messages from friends. Posts I had made days ago were gone, replaced by pictures of my double, tagged with my name. comments praised his work ethic, his charm, his dedication. I felt like I was drowning, sinking into a void where no one could see me. I had become invisible. I started to piece it together. This wasn't supernatural. It was human and elaborate, calculated takeover. But who had orchestrated it? How had they managed to convince everyone I was the imposter? And why? The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I followed my double discreetly, watching how he interacted with people, how he moved through the office like he owned the place. His confidence was liquid. My coworkers smiled, greeted him warmly, invited him to lunch. It was like he had built a new life around my identity, and I was the one left out. During a quiet moment, I approached one of the coworkers who still looked at me with a flicker of recognition. "Do you remember talking with me yesterday?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know what you mean." "You haven't been here for weeks." Weeks. I had been here every day. I realized my doppelganger had been living my life for weeks, living it better, cleaner, faster. The lines between us were blurred, and no one could or would see the truth. I confronted him again in the elevator. "Why are you doing this? Who sent you?" He looked me in the eye, his expression serious for the first time. "Nobody sent me. I'm here because I'm better at this. Because you lost your edge. And because the company deserves someone who delivers." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "You're a fraud." He shrugged. "I'm the future." The doors opened. We stepped out, and he walked ahead, leaving me behind. That night, I started making a list of everyone I could contact outside the office. Friends, family, anyone who could anchor me back to reality. But the harder I tried, the more I realized the reach of this shadow version of me. Even my own memories felt fragile, as if they belonged to someone else. I wasn't just erased from their lives, I was disappearing from my own. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't let this imposter win. Because if I lost myself completely, there would be nothing left to fight for. I clenched my fists, vowing silently to reclaim every lost fragment before the darkness consumed me whole. I sat behind my desk, the silence in the office thick and suffocating, like the calm before a storm I couldn't see coming. I wasn't sure how long I'd been here, watching the clock tick toward the end of the day, but I knew my window was narrowing. If I stayed too long, eventually someone would notice I was still here, and I'd have to explain why the real David wasn't at his desk. Except, as things stood, nobody recognized me anymore. Or at least, nobody acknowledged I existed. The day started with the usual routine of checking my calendar and emails, but the messages had changed tone. There was a subtle shift in the way my colleagues replied, as if I was a stranger pretending to be David. One or two even paused mid-sentence, their eyes flicking past me, searching for someone else, someone who wasn't there. I hadn't seen him all day. The other David, the one who had invaded my life, had vanished as quietly as he'd appeared. I wanted to believe he was gone for good. But the pit in my stomach said otherwise. I forced myself to stand and wandered the office. The hallways echoed with the hum of computers and muted conversations, but if I tried to speak to anyone, their eyes slipped past me like I was transparent. When I approached my team's workstation, a group of them was gathered around a monitor, laughing quietly. "Hey, David," Mark called out, looking right through me. I cleared my throat. "Mark. It's me. The real David." He glanced up briefly, puzzled, then shook his head. "Right, very funny." He turned back to the screen. I swallowed hard. I remembered every inside joke, every project detail, every client name. I had proof. But no one else did. "Please," I said, loud enough now, I'm not kidding. Sarah, the newest member of the team, looked over, her brow furrowed. You okay, David? You seem off today. Sarah, listen, I started, but before I could finish, someone else called her away. She left without a second glance. I sank against the wall, sliding down until I was seated on the cold floor. The weight of it all pressed down on me, how my life had been co-opted, hijacked by a man who wore my face better than I did. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. Meet me in conference room B. Now. I hesitated, then stood, heart hammering. The note was brief, terse, too precise to be a prank. I walked quickly down the hall, feeling the eyes of everyone pass over me without acknowledgement. When I reached the door of conference room B, I paused, listening. No voices. I pushed it open slowly. Inside sat Claire, my assistant. She looked up, startled, then relief flickered across her face. David, she whispered. I wasn't sure if you'd come. Claire, I said, my voice ragged, what's going on? Why can't anyone see me as me? She looked around nervously, then stood and closed the door behind me. It's complicated, she said. But you're in danger. Danger? From who? From him. She nodded toward the hallway. The other you. He's been taking over. Not just your job. Your entire life. And people don't remember you anymore because he's rewriting everything, contacts, memories, even your social media profiles. I shook my head in disbelief. How is that even possible? Claire exhaled sharply. He's good. He's been planning this for months. I didn't want to believe it either. And you? Why are you helping me? She hesitated. Because I still remember. Somehow, I'm one of the few who can. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb her words. What do we do? Claire pulled out a USB stick from her pocket and handed it to me. This has everything you need, the original files, emails, and proof that you exist. If you can get this to someone who still knows you, maybe they'll believe you. I gripped the USB tightly. Who? Your sister. She's the only one I know you're close to outside the office. If anyone can help, it's her. The thought of my sister gave me a flicker of hope. If I could just reach her, maybe I could anchor myself back into reality. Claire, I said, how long do I have before he notices I'm here? She looked grave. Not long. He's already suspicious. Suddenly, the door cracked open and a shadow appeared. David, a voice said smoothly. Or should I say, me. The other David stepped in, eyes cold but calculating. Claire moved behind me, protective. I stood my ground, the USB burning a hole in my pocket. You're wasting your time, he said. Everyone's forgotten you. I'm what matters now. I clenched my fists. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We'll see about that. As he turned to leave, Claire whispered, Go. Now. I didn't hesitate. With the USB in hand, I fled the office, leaving behind the life that wasn't mine anymore. My real fight was just beginning. The corridor outside was eerily silent, shadows stretching long under the harsh fluorescent lights. My heart pounded as footsteps echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. Each step took me further from the past I thought I'd left behind and closer to the truth buried in that tiny drive. Claire's voice echoed in my mind, trust no one. I ducked into a side door, the cool air pressing against my skin. Somewhere deep down, I knew the real danger was only just waking up.